Chapter 529. You said Ersala lost? Caesar wagged his tail and slumped on the iron chair in boredom. Odin and Luna were a bit too much. They had been in the elven forest for so long, but they didn't miss home at all. He was considering if he should also go there and catch the two little guys. Hogg considered his words carefully and said, "The allied army of Ersala and Virgil suffered a setback at the Wester Fortress in Mernin. They encountered the dwarves of the Thunderblade clan. Maknae Thunderblade is the god of the dwarves, Moradin. According to his performance on the battlefield of Wester, the Central Intelligence Department has analyzed his combat ability to be above the legendary level. He has the ability to turn the situation around by himself. This is the strongest warrior in the central battlefield that we have recorded so far," Hogg concluded. "There are also warriors among our enemies." Caesar nodded. For the allied army of Ersala and Virgil, the Thunderblade clan is indeed a big problem because there is no one in the allied army who can compete with Maknae. In the war simulation, we found that if we can't execute the plan to behead the Thunder Lord, the Trade Federation will launch a round of counterattacks under the lead of the dwarves. Without more help, Virgil will only be defeated step by step. After that, Hogg tentatively suggested, "Your Majesty, should we send the ambitious clan to the central region to provide support? They are very familiar with the Thunderblade clan, and I believe that Prince Adas has the means to deal with Maknae." "How sinister, Hogg. Do you like to see this kind of drama, where former compatriots turn against each other?" "They're enemies," Hogg said indifferently. "They were already enemies when the Swamp Alliance split up. Well, the ambitious clan has been doing their duty in the Empire. Until now, they have been continuously forging molten iron for the country. They are a member of the Empire. If they are sent to the central region, not only will it affect the current ecology of the ambitious dwarves, but it will also shake their loyalty. Not to mention that the ambitious clan is not good at fighting." Caesar rejected the proposal. The black dragon gently rubbed his claws. "The Empire has many excellent weapons, but there is no need to expose them to the south because of a Thunderblade dwarf. Maknae Thunderblade. I heard some of his remarks on the battlefield. Interesting. I think I already have a suitable candidate." It was a beautiful night in the Dragoncrime Mountains. Nelliandria was casually lying in the hall. Several vents in the cave were open, allowing the hot air in the night to drift in. Magma was churning in the huge crevice. From his luxurious lair in the Gnargly volcano in the Dragoncrime Mountains, he could hear all kinds of sounds from the outside world. Nelliandria was lying on the hot ground, shaking his tail that was immersed in the magma, dreaming about ruling and conquering. Usually, this would be his most relaxed moment, but tonight, Nelly could not find this feeling. The red dragon's senses were gradually dulled with the increasing sleepiness, but the waves in his heart were getting more and more intense. Nelly suddenly shook his head and got up from the ground. His hard eyebrows were tightly knitted together. He walked around the hot hall, analyzing the current situation over and over in his mind. These behaviors were unusual for evil dragons, especially for the red dragon. Although using the word stupid to describe the red dragon was a bit of an exaggeration, they were definitely not smart. These careless fellows could not maintain long thinking, and it was even more difficult for them to focus on one thing for a long time. This made them closer to beasts than intelligent creatures. In Iradia, the evaluation of the red dragon by the various races was at two extremes. The red dragon was worshipped for their strength and despised for their intelligence. Because it was difficult to maintain focus and not good at thinking, the red dragon did not seem to care about any danger or threat. Therefore, there were often situations where the red dragon would eat until they were fat and drunk, and then be killed by adventurers. Of course, if it were not for these well-known weaknesses, the rule of the Penishade dragons in the First Era would not have been so easily ended by the orcs and humans. But today, Nelly's situation was very abnormal. This robust red dragon let out a low panting sound. He climbed to the entrance of the cave, squatted on the top of the volcano, and looked down. After a while, he swung his tail and went into the depths of the lair. He was idle and restless. Not long ago, he was still recklessly squandering violence in the central, living in the eyes of the mortals. Tashamar of the Trade Federation offered him treasures and slaves to ask him to fight, and the Red Dragon's powerful strength did not disappoint. Halfway through, he even received an unexpected surprise. Everything was so smooth, but then the army of Ersala from the north entered the central. Nelly's nostrils flapped, breathing out a sulfur-smelling gas. Because he could not control his desire for plunder, he took the initiative to attack the army and kidnap the commander. Since then, a silent shadow shrouded him. Although the Red Dragon wisely let the commander go and cut off the cooperation with the Trade Federation, the shadow still hung over his head, lingering. Nelly felt a sense of danger. This was not a baseless self-threat, but a warning that really existed. As powerful creatures second only to the legendary races, true dragons had intuition and premonition that mortals could not understand and describe, and the Red Dragon was even more so. For mortals, the dragons were the true prophets. Most Red Dragon did not care about these things that they were born with, but if they were willing to capture, explore, they would know how important intuition and premonition were. Nelly happened to be one of the Red Dragon who knew how to make good use of his talents. He believed that these feelings of danger were not aimless, and that something was really going to happen to him. Nelly turned around and glanced at his beloved luxurious lair. Here, he stored his beloved things that he had collected for hundreds of years, including all kinds of handicrafts, magic artifacts, and ancient relics, as well as a mountain of gold coins. But now, he thought, it was time to pay the price. Nelly Andrea propped up his upper body, trying to appear more sincere. He said in a low voice, "Great Mother Tiamat, your loyal and devout believer, descendant, Red Dragon Nelly Andrea prays to you. I desire to obtain your divine enlightenment. For this, I am willing to give you all the wealth that I have accumulated in my life." Speaking up to here, Nelly suddenly stopped. He was thinking, was Tiamat's divine enlightenment and guidance worth all his wealth? Obviously not. It was better to just let him die than to take all his wealth. Then half? Too much. 1/10? That was still too much. A small piece of guidance was nothing to the Dragon Queen, so it was not worth that much. The Red Dragon thought for a while, tidied up his appearance, and spoke again. "Great Mother, your Majesty Tiamat, your loyal and pious believer and descendant, Nelly Andrea, prays to you and longs for your enlightenment to guide me. For this, I am willing to offer you 1,000 gold coins as a tribute." 1,000 gold coins, Nelly squeezed out through gritted teeth. He grabbed a handful of gold coins from the pile of treasures and raised them high into the air. His wounded heart was bleeding. There was no reaction from the entire dragon lair. Nelly paused for a moment before heaving a sigh of relief. He stuffed the precious gold coins back into his pile of treasures. He didn't have much hope in the first place, and praying was just a simple attempt. The Red Dragon tribe had never been faithful enough to the Dragon Queen. Compared to Tiamat, they were more respectful toward Coengugios. Nelly waved his tail and used some concealment techniques to conceal his pile of treasures. Seeing as praying to Dragon Queen Tiamat was not an option, he had to find another way to avoid danger. For example, digging a hole in the ground and sleeping for a few hundred years was not a bad idea. A crack was suddenly torn in the void. Nalai subconsciously moved in front of the treasure that was still not safe, even though it was covered by magic. He then lowered his head and said in a respectful and pious tone, "Your Majesty Tiamat." Only after speaking did he realize that there was no divine power, so it was not Tiamat who had appeared. Chapter 530. Nady Andrea's lair was collapsing. As the lair of a red dragon in his prime, this place was protected by layers of enchantments. It could resist small-scale magic and physical attacks, but it could not prevent the collapse of the red dragon's lair. Caesar poked his body out of the spatial crack, and his huge body pierced through the lair of the red dragon. The haze and uneasiness in Nady's heart had finally been confirmed. It turned out that ever since he appeared in front of Ursula's army, he had been recorded. And now, the Black Emperor of the North had appeared in front of him personally. Nady felt a tremor that extended from his spine to his skull. His heart raced, and his mind was filled with thoughts of impending doom. Facing the Black Emperor of the Iradia, the red dragon's first thought was to escape, but his limbs seemed to be less agile. His wings trembled slightly, but they did not flap, as if a powerful spell had been cast on him. But in fact, Caesar did nothing but stare at him. There was no doubt that this guy was the typical red dragon of the Iradia. His horns were prominent, his scales were bright, and he was huge and strong. He had the largest head and the strongest muscles among the 5 color dragons, and a relatively short neck. His characteristic of leaning towards close combat made his fangs and teeth even more prominent, and his whole body emitted a choking smell of sulfur. It was worth mentioning that in the records of the Blackwing Empire, Nady was a red dragon in his prime, but his body was already more than 30 meters tall. Even among the red dragons, he was one of the most talented. Of course, in front of Caesar, the 30-meter-tall red dragon could only be considered a small guy. The Black Emperor did not speak. Nady was being sized up by him, but he did not dare to ask anything. He could only cower and avoid the Black Emperor's gaze. He uneasily moved his hind claws, leaving gullies on the ground. After a while, Caesar said, "Nady Andrea, a 372-year-old red dragon in his prime. Nice to meet you." "I'm not happy at all," Neville said in his heart. He forced a smile and said, "I salute you, the great Dragon King, the Black Emperor, your Majesty Tangerine." The red dragon probably doesn't like long-winded pleasantries, so I'll get straight to the point. To be honest, I've encountered some small problems recently. Something is hindering the implementation of my plan, so I thought of you. Caesar said, "I have carefully investigated your information. There is no doubt that you are a powerful, ferocious, and feared red dragon. Unfortunately, your reputation does not match your strength. Before this, you have made many efforts to expand your influence and reputation, but the results have been minimal. I think you just lack an opportunity." What opportunity? To be honest, Nalai was not very interested in Caesar's words, but he had to answer this question. The opportunity to seize power and power, Caesar said. He raised his head and looked around. He stretched out his claws and pushed the collapsed gravel aside. "You have no relatives or servants. So you're a lone dragon?" "Neville, I remember that many years ago, there was a very famous lone dragon in the Red Dragon, Queen Oxia, but she was finally slaughtered by humans, skinned and scaled, and her skull was hung on the tower for those heroes to show off. Do you want to learn from her?" Nalai's eyes moved, but he did not make a sound. "It seems that you don't want to." Caesar said, "Let me guess. It's not that you don't want to be a real lord, but you were born in Hudjian, where the resources have long been divided up by humans. You can't establish your own power. Dragon Cry Mountain, this place seems to be your territory, but you can't exercise dominance over it. On any of Iradia's maps, Dragon Cry Mountain does not have the name of Nady Andrea. Power and power. What do you plan to give me, and what do I have to pay?" Nalai took the bait. Power and power, status, and wealth were the supreme desires engraved in the depths of the Penishade dragon's blood. For most Penishade dragons, as long as these desires could be satisfied, even selling their souls and bodies to make a deal with the devil was not a problem. Forget about your Tiamat. Join the Blackwing Legion and fight for the Empire. Pay is pay. As long as your performance is outstanding enough, you will have the opportunity to fight for a place in the Empire and obtain the opportunity to rule the entire Central Region. The entire Central Region. The Northern Empire is preparing to take this place for themselves? Caesar shook his head. Nalai, if you are well informed, you should know that Iradia will usher in a catastrophe in 200 years. Not only the Central Region, but even the unfallen Empire in the south will be swallowed by the Blackwing Legion. Because only a complete and unified Iradia can resist the invasion of the Abyss demons. The Black Dragon said in a gentle tone, "When I climb to the throne of the world and defeat the Abyss demons, everyone who has helped me will share the wealth of this world with me. Do you want to join?" Nalai Andrea. It's truly a long journey. The Red Dragon's thoughts seemed to have drifted to 100 years in the future. He paused for a while before coming back to his senses. "What should I do?" Caesar smiled. The allied forces of Arsala and Virgil have been obstructed on the battlefield of Maze Inn. Maknae Thunderblade, a legendary dwarf warrior. That is your target. Nalai showed a puzzled expression. With my current ability, I can't kill a legendary dwarf. Of course, so I will not be stingy with giving you some help. This will also be your first reward. Caesar stretched out his claw and gently touched the red dragon's forehead. Before he could block or even turn his head, the black dragon's big claw directly hit Nalai's head. He felt an intense pain coming from his skull, as if a powerful spear was piercing his scales. His eardrums swelled, and there was a loud rumbling sound. His limbs were sore, his wings were weak and drooping down, and his tail was curled into a ball. It's just a small sequela. It will be fine soon. At this time, Caesar had already retracted his claw. You? What did you do? Nalai asked. He felt that his mind was still clear, and he was not contaminated like the legendary radiation dragons. But his limbs were numb and his joints were weak. Don't worry, if I want to turn you into a radiation puppet, I would have done so from the beginning. I wouldn't have wasted time and breath on you. Caesar glanced at the red dragon. This is psionic enhancement. I left a psionic seed in your body. Awaken it at the critical moment, and you will get a huge improvement. It can help you deal with Maknae. Under the black dragon's terrifying appearance, many people forgot that Caesar was not only the powerful king of the Black Wings, but also a highly accomplished psionic master. When this kind of mental energy was developed to the extreme, it could produce many effects that were comparable to or even surpassing magic. Psionic enhancement was one of them. After the psionic seed was awakened and activated, the receiver would obtain thinking activity, nerve reaction, strength, and tolerance that far exceeded the past in a short period of time. However, there would be some damage to the receiver afterwards. This was something that Caesar did not mention. The reason why he chose Nalai Andrea, other than this guy being a dragon and being favored by Caesar, was another reason. In the background investigation of this red dragon, the Blackwing Empire found that this guy had a rather unpleasant past with a descendant of the goddess of magic, Feline Ramft. In the end, Nalai apologized, but Feline Ramft still threatened to beat this red dragon up every time she saw him. Nalai, who is active in the central battlefield, might be able to lure that crazy woman out. And the descendant of the goddess of magic was the target of Caesar and Lord of Storms Talos. Chapter 531. I refuse. Maknae placed his hand on the table, poured a mouthful of wine into his mouth, wiped his mouth, and blew his beard. Not all attacks were initiated by Virgil. I don't see any signs of the Federation working hard to seek peace. I think what you should do next is to avoid war as much as possible and negotiate peace with the other party. If it was possible, the head of state would have done that long ago. General, there is no peace in this war of life and death. The senior Federation official sitting opposite him sighed and said, if you want to talk about who is responsible for this, it would be Rune Joseph. He surrendered to Air Sala and let foreign enemies interfere with the central continent's affairs. These pests not only plague the north, but also want to climb into our land and territory. They want to enter the central continent and conquer the Trade Federation. His voice gradually became louder. The threat of Virgil has existed for too long. Now that we have the advantage, we must eradicate them without mercy. General Maknae, you have the wrong idea in your heart, thinking that tolerance and peace can make both sides reconcile, but that is no longer possible. We must seriously deal with the damage that Rune Joseph has brought to the central continent. Air Sala has eaten away our resources, tarnished our land, and weakened us through various means. Our fate is not to beg for peace with them. This land belongs to us, and Rune Joseph and the people behind him have no right to possess it. In the end, the Federation official gave a conclusion, which was also the order of head of state to Shammer. After recovering the lost land of Fanon, we must pursue the victory and attack Koer, eliminate all enemies, remove all obstacles, and expel Air Sala. Forgive me for being blunt, but I don't think you have the ability to drive the enemy out. Maknae's expression was calm, and he did not become hot-blooded because of this encouragement. He was very calm, and his performance on the battlefield was completely different. Other than Air Sala, Ruin Joseph has even more supporters behind him. Using war as a solution to suppress them will only lead to a more powerful backlash. The Federation officials' expression changed slightly. The Trade Federation will face pressure from the entire North. This is known to all, but we also have our own allies and reinforcements. General Macnay, this is not something you should consider. Your order is to lead the Thunderblade clan into Coer. Macnay stared at the Federation official. My soldiers suffered heavy losses in the last battle, and a large number of wounded people are waiting for treatment. At the same time, we also need meat, fruits, vegetables, and weapons. After all the requirements are met, I think the Thunderblade clan will be able to participate in the next war. A reasonable request. The official nodded. But now the situation is dangerous and the war is urgent. So the Federation's current situation, and the Federation is trying its best to collect resources from all sides. Sir, I believe that when your troops enter Coer, the demands of the Thunderblade clan will be met. In other words, we won't be able to get supplies from the Federation before we conquer Call. Macnay raised his eyebrows. Then, please forgive me for refusing the battle order. The Thunderblade clan can't afford more without replenishment. General Macnay, the Federation official's tone became stiff. He was about to lose his patience. Please don't forget that when you migrated to the Central Region, the Trade Federation warmly and kindly accepted you. They did not discriminate because of your race and gave the Thunderblade clan the greatest preferential treatment. Now, we need the strength of the dwarves. No one is willing to see their efforts go to waste. You must know that even during times of war, Leader Tashammer did not forget to give your people the strictest protection. They are still living freely in SWO Harbor, bathing in the best sunlight of the Central Continent. Macnay raised his eyebrows. This was not a consolation, but a blatant threat. SWO Harbor was the settlement of the Thunderblade clan. When Macnay led his soldiers to rescue Fan In, only the elderly and children were left there. Tashamu still had troops stationed there. Thunder Lord clenched his fists. His eyes were bursting with anger, as if he would burst out in the next second and break the bones of this human. But in the end, he chose to endure. The powerful dwarf prince was discouraged. His expression was gloomy, and he replied, "Understood. I will lead the Thunderblade clan to attack Coer." The official left satisfied. At this moment, Macnay suddenly regretted leaving the swamp. If his attitude had been gentler, he would have taken into account the feelings and demands of the other clans. If he had paid more attention to communication, the situation of the dwarves might have been completely different. The Swamp Alliance had fallen apart. He wondered if the two princes, Artis Lofty and Marin Blazingstar, had ever felt the same way. Not long after, detailed instructions were sent over. Macnay was deeply disgusted with what he was about to do. For a long time, the dwarves had fought for justice, protection, and faith. But this time he was being coerced. If he refused, the Confederation would harm the Thunderblade clan's people in SWO Harbor. Macnay crumpled the letter into a ball and made a gloomy expression at Harquin Thunderblade. "Let's be prepared," he said. "At least we are still fighting for ourselves. We are fighting to expel the enemy." Following this order, which he did not like, Macnay gathered his clan's warriors, dwarven knights, and musketeers and approached the border of Coer as quietly as possible. They marched silently according to the instructions, with only the occasional creaking of armor and the stomping of the ponies. When they arrived at the border, Macnay was surprised that the Vaeger's army in Coer had not noticed at all. He had sent out several scouts to make sure that Vaeger's and Il Sala were caught off guard by the attack. The scouts reported that there were only a few people on duty at this time. The musketeers carefully boarded the observation platform to act as distant observation posts. Dwarves could see better in the dark than humans, and Vaeger's soldiers always foolishly lit campfires. "Chief, judging from the number of campfires, the number of soldiers is not more than usual," a scout said in a low voice. "They did not expect us to attack so soon." Macnay raised his arm to make sure that everyone could see, and then waited quietly. His heart was pounding, and the great power of Moradin, the god of dwarves, slowly condensed on his body. 3, 2, 1. Then there was a blood-chilling roar. Maknae suddenly swung his arm down and was the first to rush out with his heavy hammer and battle axe. In the dark, there was the sound of weapons clashing, the shouts of humans resisting stubbornly, and the heavy sound of crossbows and muskets hitting the target. The Vaeger's soldiers were completely caught off guard. The Thunderblade dwarves roared and rushed into the battlefield like a flood. A foolish soldier rushed towards Maknae himself, shouting for Vaeger's. His simple military longsword was broken by Maknae's battle hammer. The broken sword fragments flew high, shining in the faint light of the fire, and then disappeared into the darkness. Maknae swung his battle hammer again, and the soldier's mail armor could not withstand the blunt weapon's blow. Under the huge force of the blow, his whole body flew out far away. After a short pause, the roar of victory echoed in the night sky. Maknae looked around. The battle had only started for a moment, and they had won easily and captured Vaeger's outpost camp. For this battle, this is a good sign, Harkwin Thunderblade said. Maknae shook his head. That is if no one escapes. Under the cover of the night, they can escape to the castles of Koer to report, so we'd better go to the castles in the north immediately and capture as much land as possible before the enemy can react. Chapter 532. Tonight, it was Dirty Eagle Ollie's turn to be on duty at Sergeant Fico's camp. The camp was located at the edge of a mysterious, overgrown oasis, and the forest seemed to have sprung up overnight. Even though the veteran liked to drink a glass of wine every half an hour, he was very serious about his assigned duties. He had not touched a drop of wine since nightfall, and now it was almost dawn. He patted his large-caliber flintlock. He liked this weapon. After all, it was an imported product from the north. Its power was astonishing, and its accuracy was amazing. Just one shot was enough to take the life of a fiery maned bear. This was a symbol of honor. It was an extravagant wish for those inexperienced recruits to even touch it. Ollie sighed softly. Soon, his duty would be over, and he would be able to open a bottle of cherry wine, drink 2 mouthfuls, and have a good night's sleep. Rustling sounds came from the bushes, and the veteran's various expressions disappeared in an instant. Then, he jumped up at a speed that most people would not be able to reach. In the no-man's land of Koer, they could be attacked by all kinds of strange creatures, such as velociraptors, mutated birds, evil races, and those annoying things that looked like big flowers or tree demons. A soldier stumbled forward. His clothes were in a mess, and the badge on his chest was embroidered with a white bear hugging a tree. He looked at Ollie in a sorry state, and then fell down. Ollie didn't even have the time to catch his body. Nose! Ollie called out to his companion. We're in trouble. A few seconds later, all the guards on duty arrived at the scene. A veteran soldier began to bandage the brave scout's wounds, but Ollie sadly realized that the young man would not be able to recover. Sergeant Tilly's camp was not qualified to have a priest. When Ollie leaned over, the scout eagerly reached out his hand and grabbed Ollie's arm. Dwarf, dwarf, the scout said in a hoarse voice. Attack the border camp east. I'm not a deserter. His eyes were open, and his stiff body fell to the ground. His brown hair was stained with blood. You're not a deserter. You've delivered the news. Well done, warrior. Ollie clumsily patted his shoulder. Now rest well. He was hit in the back with an axe. The veteran soldier who was bandaging the scout's wound said, So ruthless. He lost so much blood. It's hard to imagine how this Vaeger's got here. The dwarves are coming again, said Ollie. May the glory of Azara protect us. A minute later, 2 ravens were released from the camp of Fico's expeditionary army. At the same time, in order to prevent any accidents, Blake, who was the fastest among them and had the best stamina, ran towards the castle in the north as fast as he could with his strong and long legs. At the same time, he prayed to the gods that he could make it in time. The others were also packing up and preparing to head out to inform the various camps. From late at night until dawn, the dwarves kept moving east, far away from the front-line command post of Vaeger's. Other than taking the initiative to attack the 3 outpost camps that they had to pass through, they had not encountered any resistance so far. As they passed through the overgrown oasis, they found the ruins of camp. The campfire had been extinguished, but the charcoal was still warm, and there was not much dust on it. The dwarves could not tell who had been stationed here before, because in the no-man's land of Koer, there were often rebels and bandits, and some of the evil races who had migrated far away would also set up camp here. It was not until they found some broken crossbows in the camp that they judged that this was the outpost of an army. Maknae wondered if their actions were still unknown. As time passed, the Rift Valley appeared on their left, and the winding road led them into gently rolling hills. It seemed that they were lucky. After crossing the hills, their military target was in front of them, the castle in the north. Maknae looked at the sky, and the long night was near, and dawn was about to arrive, so he ordered them to stop moving forward. "Let's rest for a while. Brothers of the clan, calm down and pray to your gods, so that we can prepare ourselves for the battle, and let our souls welcome the possible death." After a long night's journey, the dwarves would be tired no matter how strong their bodies were. They needed to rest for a while, and then they would launch the attack at the end of the journey. General Duncan Alley, the head knight of the Expeditionary Army, woke up before dawn, as usual. He quickly got out of bed, splashed water on his face, and rinsed his mouth. After that, he put on his clothes and began to trim his beard and lip. It was rare for him to care about his appearance, and Duncan saw that there were many bruises under his eyes from the mirror. In the past few weeks, the Expeditionary Army was not doing well, and they were forced to give up the land of Myrnin and return to the Koer war zone. The Confederation Army was reorganizing the defeated soldiers, and some small-scale battles had already broken out at the border between Myrnin and Koer. There was news that the enemy was talking nonsense, saying things like the fate of the invaders is coming and everyone will die here. It seems that the victory of the dwarves has restored their confidence, Duncan thought, and having a sausage for breakfast with strong tea, he set out on his usual patrol route. Although it was still early, the messengers still noticed him and greeted him with a fist salute. Duncan nodded, and the two went up the watchtower together. Dawn had arrived, and the forest and the hills were dyed pink and dark red by the morning light. The clouds in the sky were also painted with golden edges. "Today will be a good day," the messenger said. "I hope so," Duncan said. "Was there anything unusual last night?" "I didn't see any signal or a raven," the messenger said. "It was very quiet last night, and everyone was sleeping soundly. But in the middle of the night, a patrol soldier was caught drinking at night and was sent to the court. The night was long, and I often drink to refresh myself. The judge should punish him to sweep the stable." Duncan smiled, and then suddenly narrowed his eyes. "Is that a raven?" The messenger followed his gaze, and his face became dignified. "Yes." Although ravens were quite obedient messengers, no one would like them now, because in times of war, these little black guys often carried bad news. When they appeared, it meant that something had happened. The messenger blew the whistle and reached out to summon the raven. He took off the parchment and handed it to Duncan Alley without opening it. "Bad news," Duncan said as he read. "Scouts report that Maknae Thunderblade led the dwarves to attack the border camp of Virgil. They are coming east, and I have reason to suspect that the castle in the north is their next target." After that, he handed the parchment to the messenger, and when the messenger carefully inspected it, he said, "Tashamor is eager to recover the lost land, and wants to use the power of the Thunderblade clan to further frustrate the opponent. If it were me, I would do the same. After all, we have the advantage. If there is enough time, the Expeditionary Army will find a way to deal with the dwarf sooner or later. What should we do?" The messenger looked up. "Send a message to inform the commanders of the Expeditionary Army," Duncan said as he quickly left the watchtower and ordered the guards waiting under the tower. "The castle in the north is in a state of war. Let the soldiers prepare for battle and send out all the scouts. In addition, send a team of elite warriors to guard the square and be sure to keep the transmission array unblocked. We're going to give those little guys a hard time here." In order to ensure victory, a lot of preparation work needed to be done in an orderly manner. The castle in the north woke up quickly at dawn, and the soldiers were busy checking the city's defenses to ensure that every artillery and crossbow was in good condition. Spellcasters ran back and forth between the mage towers, and the light they emitted formed an elemental curtain. Chapter 533. They formed an arc at the intersection, where the view was broad. Maknae could see the gray and white marble of the northern castle, with the flag of the Azhara alliance hanging on it. The castle was very quiet, shrouded in a layer of golden light under the rising sun, like the residence of a princess in a fairy tale. It could be seen that it had not yet awakened, and the Azhara alliance stationed in the northern castle was unprepared. Maknae raised his hand and ordered the army to get ready to charge at the castle. Bang! The tranquility of the barren land was suddenly broken by gunfire. Sparks burst out from the watchtower of the castle, followed by the drum-like firing sound. Dense bullets poured down from the top, killing a team of dwarves who were sneaking around in a roundabout way. Damn it, they know. The dwarves of the Thunderblade clan immediately reacted, using their own guns, bows, and throwing axes to fight back at the soldiers on the watchtower. Maknae could only feel a surge of anger. He should have expected this situation and been prepared for the sudden attack. But because of a false sense of security and a fluke mentality, his people fell on the way forward, paying the price for their own stupidity. "Assault team, follow me," Maknae shouted, his loud voice full of anger. "Spellcasters, protect your companions and interfere with their shooting." The dwarven mages obeyed the order. After the collapse of the Swamp Alliance, Maknae realized that they could no longer rely on the spell-casting power of the Blazing Star clan, so he paid more attention to the training of mages in the clan. He took the initiative to send talented dwarven apprentices to the Trade Federation for further study. Today, even the Thunderblade clan, which used to be full of armor, had a small spellcasting team. However, this level of spellcasting team could not cause much damage to Azhara's army on the castle. Their greatest use was to provide protection for the soldiers who were attacking. Under the attack of Azhara, the soldiers who were struggling to move forward were either knocked down to the ground or swept away by the sudden wind. Some of them even had their clothes on fire, and they screamed in pain. In the chaos, Maknae had already jumped to the front of the army and threw himself into the fierce battle. He raised a solid stone several meters high under the castle and threw it fiercely. The huge stone hit the surface of the elemental fluid on the surface of the castle, and at the same time, the castle's barrier was temporarily disabled. The Thunder Lord strode forward, his footsteps never stopping in the face of the towering walls. He roared loudly, and like a giant dragon, he rammed into the outer wall. The flesh and blood of a legendary warrior was even stronger than the walls of the city. A hole was actually created in the outer wall of the northern castle, and rubble rolled out far away. As expected, a smile appeared on Maknae's face. He knew that the outer wall of the northern castle had collapsed during the battle between Koer and Vagers, and the foolish Aisha people did not do their best to repair it. They simply piled it up and filled it in, making it look like a frightening thing. Now, these Azhara people would regret this and pay the price in blood. The dwarves charged forward, constantly widening the gap in the outer wall, and flooded through the bridge made of boulders and planks. A human guard rushed towards Maknae with a spear. He was a veteran, strong and agile, and also familiar with the weapon in his hand, but he was no match for the warriors around Maknae. The Thunderblade dwarves let out a battle cry and swarmed forward to hit the guard's body with their axes and flail. One of the heavy blows made a terrible creaking sound, which could be heard clearly even in the war drums, fighting, and gunfire. The guard fell to the ground. The dwarves admired this warrior, but still stepped on his body and continued to charge forward. This castle used to belong to the Trade Federation, and Tashamu had already told Maknae all the weaknesses, secret passages, and traps of this castle. He knew how to command his people to fight in the castle. The first wave of attack went smoothly. They were full of momentum and mercilessly cut down the enemy. After spending dozens of people to knock down 4 arrow towers, the Thunderblade dwarves gained control of the outer wall. Maknae climbed to a high place on the outer wall to have a good view of the overall situation. They needed to break into the depths of the castle. Once they succeeded, the enemy commander would not be able to reverse the situation with any strategy or conspiracy. This task would take about an hour to complete, but Maknae did not want to wait that long. The enemy had obviously discovered them in advance, but the attacks and resistance were not as fierce as expected. When the dwarves rushed into the outer wall, they found that only a few human soldiers were left here. It could be said that the enemy had almost given up the outer area of the castle. Maknae was a little uneasy and afraid of making mistakes. He decided to give the enemy the final blow as soon as possible, not giving them a chance to play tricks. He wanted to end the battle with a clean victory. So the Thunderblade dwarves had almost no time to rest. They were ordered to gather together, and after the spellcasters gave them simple group healing and iron will, they marched into the depths of the castle without stopping. At the same time, behind the Thunderblade dwarves, the boulders on the path they took to come here began to tremble. The color changed from the brown and grayish-black of ordinary rocks to bright red, and then mottled orange. These stones were melting, and then they began to tremble as if they were given life. They pulsed and lost their original shape, melting into a pool of hot liquid. A tendril emerged from one of the pools of liquid, followed by a second, a third. These tendrils fused with each other and shortened, reforming into palms and toes. A head emerged from the top, opening an irregular mouth full of small sharp teeth and looking around with small dark red eyes. After everything was done, these elemental creatures began to walk towards the dwarves with strong legs. Maknae waved his warhammer to deal with 3 soldiers with spears. He knew that the real battle had begun. The resistance of the inner wall was 100 times stronger than that of the outer wall. He was surrounded by all kinds of sounds: the sound of muskets, the roar of cannons, the whistling of arrows, the roar of spells, and the battle cries of the dwarves and the humans resounded throughout the battlefield. An elite soldier rushed towards him, but he could do nothing in front of the king of dwarves. The spear only pierced the air. Maknae smashed the human to the ground with his hammer, and then with a backhand strike, he cut the attacker who cooperated with the soldier into 2 halves. Blood and organs drenched him. Blood and thunder. McNeil roared. At that moment, something seemed to have changed around them. A sound that had never been heard before joined in, a heavy growl. The dwarven king immediately turned his head towards the sound and saw the elemental creation that appeared behind the dwarves. Lava behemoths! His companion, Hakian Thunderblade, roared. Damn it, where did they come from? We didn't find them before. The lava behemoths opened their mouths wide. In the eyes of the dwarves, they were like moving fortresses. These elemental creatures strode forward, waving their arms and smashing all the dwarves who dared to come up and stop them. Many of them were easily crushed and trampled to death, while others were stunned and killed by flying stones. Steady, my fellow clansmen. Maknae jumped down from the battlements. Don't look back. Keep moving forward. The Thunder Lord entered the state of Holy Spirit, and the earth suddenly trembled. Many dwarves lost their footing and fell to the ground. Dark clouds covered the sky, and lightning flashed, followed by a deafening thunder. Nothing can stop us. Ersala spent a lot of effort to tamper with the boulders and hide the fluctuations of magic power. They wanted to use the lava behemoths to complete the encirclement of the dwarves. Their strategy had succeeded. As soon as the lava behemoths appeared, they caused huge casualties to the Thunderblade dwarves. However, no one would have thought that Maknae had the ability to crush all the magma behemoths. When the Dwarf King returned with the thunder and entered the battlefield, a massacre began immediately. The bodies of the magma behemoths were as fragile as dolls. These powerful elemental creations had not even had the time to unleash their power before they were smashed into pieces by the more powerful ones. The elemental creatures fell one by one, and the morale of the Ersala Expeditionary Army fell. Maknae Thunderblade, this dwarf, was like a god descending from heaven. He was an army alone, and no one could compete with him. Anywhere was better than facing this inhuman monster surrounded by electric arcs. What made things worse was that at this moment, flames ignited in the sky. The young Red Dragon, who had fought for the Trade Federation, had returned. It seemed that he would also join the battlefield. After making sure that the opponent was stunned and unresponsive, it stepped forward and grabbed the huge rock ball with its two front claws. It used its tail to drive away the thunder blade dwarfs that came to harass it. It flapped its wings and struggled to rise into the sky. It had been instructed to deal with Maknae. The battle in the northern castle had nothing to do with it. Chapter 535. Maknae jumped up vigilantly and looked around, but there was no enemy in front of him. He was in a dark dungeon, surrounded by hard granite walls. The ground was wet, and water droplets seeped out from the stone slabs above his head. There was a faint smell of decay in the air. If his memory was correct, the Red Dragon had gone crazy during the battle in the northern castle and used power that did not belong to it. Maknae remembered that he was gradually unable to withstand the psionic bombardment. So he was caught? What was the situation in the northern castle? After he fainted, did the Thunderblade dwarves encounter the Red Dragon's massacre? Maknae suddenly felt a burst of fear. His chaotic thoughts shuttled back and forth in his mind until he saw his warhammer and double-edged axe in the corner. Only then did he calm down a little. No matter what, he had to get out of here quickly. Maknae walked to the corner and picked up his weapon. He didn't know who his captor was, nor did he know why the captor treated him so carelessly like an ordinary prisoner. He even left his weapon in the cell, but none of that mattered. Maknae was burning with anxiety. He had to return to the northern castle immediately. This dungeon couldn't hold him. Just then, dull footsteps came from the dungeon. An orc appeared in front of Maknae. He was nearly 2 meters tall and had thick muscles all over his body. His heavy black shoulder armor clanged as he walked. In front of the dwarf, he was like a small mountain. Maknae had to raise his head to see his face. "You're awake," the orc said in a muffled voice. "Because of your incompetence, the Thunderblade dwarves were defeated in the battle in the northern castle and had to withdraw from Koer." The orc's words made Maknae temporarily suppress his desire to attack and escape. He calmed down and asked, "Where am I now? How much time has passed?" The orc did not answer. He reached out and opened the iron bars of the prison. They did not lock it. "Let's go. His Majesty wants to see you." Upon hearing the word, "Your Majesty," McNeil had a bad premonition. He had some guesses, and what he saw next confirmed his guesses. Outside the dungeon, there were walking orcs everywhere. Above his head were towering scaffolding and tower cranes. The pitch-black, heavy, and fierce-looking iron tower stood tall. The hard metal edges and corners made him feel uncomfortable all over. "Welcome to Victory." The busy orcs on the roadside saw the dwarves and shouted mockingly. McNeil noticed that some of these orcs were brown in color, and their bodies showed signs of atavism. This was an orc city. In the third era of the Iradia continent, there had never been such a large-scale orc settlement, except for one place, the Blackwing Empire. Although it was called a city, McNee felt that this place was more like a war fortress. Every aspect of it was filled with coldness and militarization. Even this building that resembled a lord's hall was the same. McNee walked in under the orc's lead and met the legendary emperor of the Blackwing Empire. He sat on the seat of the great chief and supported his head with his hand. His whole body was covered in iron black horned armor. Thick horns and thorns appeared on every part of his body. He looked like a demon lord in human form. His thick tail hung down from the chair and curled around his feet. Caesar was in his second form. Otherwise, Victor's Hall wouldn't be able to accommodate his body. McNeil Thunderblade. Caesar put down the battle report and looked at the dwarf in front of him with interest. "To be honest, your performance in the central battlefield really gave me a headache. You caused me a lot of trouble. If every clan leader in the Trade Federation was as difficult to deal with as you, then the Empire's progress would have to be delayed for centuries. Blackwing King. McNeil stared at the figure on the chair. His voice was full of caution and fear, but it didn't have the respect or fear of ordinary people. I've investigated your Thunderblade clan. Caesar said, just like my orc tribe, every Thunderblade dwarf is an excellent warrior. But at the same time, you're also conceited. Your clan is the instigator of the Swamp Alliance's collapse. Iron King McNeil Thunderblade. The three castle kingdoms' infighting is inseparable from your stubbornness. I heard that Ada's ambitious heart took his clan to the north. What? Are you here to help him question me? McNeil said. No. Caesar wasn't angry at McNeil's disrespect. He wasn't an ordinary chromatic dragon. He was the black monarch of the dragons in the prime material plane. I'm telling you the truth. I'm telling you your failures and mistakes. If the Three Castle Kingdom was still a united alliance, you might not even be here today. The war that he personally planned forced the dwarves to move away from their homeland and almost destroyed everything they had. After the Swamp Alliance split up, McNeil deeply realized his mistake and cried bitterly in the middle of the night, covering his face and reflecting. But people could not live in pain and regret, so he buried the past deep in his heart and tried his best to carry the Thunderblade clan forward with a stronger and firmer attitude. But now, this black dragon brought up the past again and again. His words were as sharp as swords, constantly exposing his wounds. McNeil couldn't stand it anymore. His eyes were red, and he roared at the black dragon on the throne like an injured beast. What are you trying to say? I'm just reminding you not to repeat the same mistakes, Caesar said. Bah! McNeil spat on the floor. No need to put on an act here, Black Dragon. I know what you're thinking. You're an evil person who bullies the weak. Power and status can't hide your ugly heart. As you said, I am indeed a person who bullies the weak. Caesar said nonchalantly, but the strong should oppress the weak. Only then will the weak work hard. This is the meaning of the existence of the strong. You should know that the strong prey on the weak is the iron law of nature. Even the gods can't change it. Don't you understand? Oh, right. He seemed to suddenly remember something. You've dirted my floor. Clean it. Overlapping voices echoed in the hall, and a silent pressure spread. When the black dragon's golden eyes lit up, McNeil felt as if 1,000 pounds of weight had fallen from the sky, pressing him down so hard that he couldn't raise his head. This power was enough to make him kneel. Command! Royalty! McNeil's strength burst out. In order to resist the pressure of the Black Emperor, he was forced to enter the state of the Holy Spirit. The power of the dwarf god filled his body, strengthening every cell in his body. He held his weapon and walked forward, wanting to fight the black dragon, but every step was extremely difficult. His body was bent, as if he was carrying a mountain. Roar! Macne let out a deep growl. His face was flushed red, but in the end, he still could not swing his hammer at the black dragon. That was because the knee of the warrior who was above legendary could no longer bear the burden and shattered. The dwarf king was forced to fall to the ground. When he fell to the ground, the pressure on his body also disappeared. You can knock me down or even kill me, but you'll never think that I'll kneel to you, McNeil said while panting, still staring at the black dragon with eyes full of disgust. I know, you're an unyielding warrior. Caesar smiled, but I've seen too many warriors like you. Do you know how they swallowed their words in the end? McNeil, maybe you're not afraid of death, but after you die, what will happen to your soldiers, your home, and your people? As he said that, he snapped his fingers, and an ear-piercing sound of metal rubbing against each other was heard. An orc rushed over and handed an image crystal to McNeil, who was lying on the ground. The Thunderblade dwarves set up camp at the border between Kahl and Mernin and set up camp. However, less than 100 miles away from the Thunderblade dwarves, Ursula's elite troops were gathering. At the same time, they also sent a cavalry troop to the border of Mernin to cut off the escape route of the Thunderblade dwarves and complete the encirclement. The Thunderblade dwarves who had lost their leader were still ignorant. Using inferior images to deceive me, do you think I'm an ignorant child? Black Dragon. McNeil sneered after he finished watching. The Trade Federation is guarding Air Sala to the death. If Ursula's army wants to enter Myrnin, they will definitely start a war with the Federation's army. Even if the Federation's army is defeated and broken through, my clan will be alerted. It's impossible for the Thunderblade clan to not know about this. To this, Caesar only smiled and did not give any explanation. The gloomy laughter made McNeil's hair stand on end. A terrifying thought appeared in his mind. There was a traitor in the Trade Federation who served the Blackwing Empire, and his position was not low. He opened the border that he was guarding and allowed Ursula's army to enter Myrnin. You thought of it? Looking at the uncertain expression on Macne's face, Caesar said frivolously, apart from that, there are also the Thunderblade dwarves in SWO Harbor. There's so many of them, but all we need to do is to throw down one mana bomb. He made a blooming gesture, boom, and nothing will be left. McNeil closed his eyes hopelessly. Caesar sat on his throne and picked up the wine glass on the half-dragon maid's tray. He gently shook it twice, and the dark red wine swirled in the glass. It looked particularly enchanting under the contrast of the fire on both sides of the chief's hall. Caesar took a sip of the wine and said, "Pledge your loyalty to me, and Ursula's army will withdraw and allow the Thunderblade clan's dwarves to return to Myrnin. Otherwise, you know what will happen." "I can't do that." McNeil avoided Black Dragon's gaze and said painfully, "The dwarf god does not allow me to help the wicked and help the wicked. That depends on whether you pledge your loyalty to your clan or to your god." McNeil did not speak. He was silent for a long time before he said in a voice that was almost hard to hear, "You can clearly kill me and turn me into an undead, or when I'm unconscious, you can use your legendary terrifying radiation to turn me into a war machine. But why did you let me live, torture me in this way, and force me to pledge my loyalty to you? Aren't you afraid that I'll find an opportunity to defect? What I want is an excellent general who can command battles, not a walking corpse." Caesar said, "As for defecting, you can escape to the astral world and become a wandering warrior. I won't be able to find you that way, but your clan can't migrate, and they can only stay in Iradia forever. In fact, you don't have to do this. I promise you, if one day you can become the strongest among my dependents, I will give you back your freedom, and you will no longer be a threat to the Thunderblade clan. You promise?" McNeil clenched his fists. He might not be able to defeat the Black Dragon in this lifetime, but the Black Dragon's dependents might not be strong to this extent. If this promise was true, he believed that he would be able to do it soon. In the name of Tangerine, it's a promise. McNeil's clenched fists suddenly loosened, and he used his warhammer to support his body. Then, from today onwards, I will conceal my identity and fight for you, Emperor Tangerine. From now on, your name is Darkblade. Chapter 536. Caesar yawned as he sat in the spectator seats of the Round Palace Arena. After receiving the Black Dragon's promise, Macne, who had just pledged his loyalty, immediately challenged Caesar's subordinates. It had to be said that the King of Thunder was indeed an excellent and powerful warrior. Even after losing his god's favor and being unable to enter the Holy Spirit state, his battle prowess was still not to be underestimated. Macne easily defeated the Orc chieftain Gaul, then narrowly defeated Hogg, who was using a legendary weapon. Finally, he faced his final opponent, Nero. In the legends of the southern part of Iradia, Caesar Ordoronzo Tangerine was described as an evil dragon born for destruction and slaughter. He was the embodiment of the abyss's supreme will, an amalgamation of negative energy and shadows. This evil dragon that resided in the north had gathered all races that yearned for violence and evil, waiting to launch a war that would destroy the world. Under the evil dragon Tangerine's feet, countless crazy and terrifying monsters prostrated themselves before him, and the infernal demon hound, Nero, was the leader of these monsters. He was the most notorious demon, the strongest and sharpest weapon of the evil dragon. Caesar couldn't help but laugh after reading this so-called legend. It seemed that the unfalling empire had spared no effort to tarnish the reputation of the North. However, although the legend was greatly exaggerated and fabricated, There was at least one point that was correct, and that was that Nero was indeed Caesar's sharpest and strongest weapon. This demon hound leader that had followed Caesar all the way from the Underdark was completely activated after the second mutation. He was the only clan leader among Caesar's subordinates that could still maintain his physical stability and mental state without falling into madness after the second mutation. In a sense, Nero was no longer a creature of the same level as Hog, the Red Lotus Goblin, and the Radiation Dragon. The external manifestation was that on the left and right sides of Nero's neck, two other ferocious and ruthless heads had appeared. From this point of view, it was not an exaggeration to call Nero the Infernal Demon Hound. He truly deserved the name. As soon as he saw the Demon Hound chief, Macne felt an immense pressure. Perhaps Macne, Thunderblade, could have fought against him in the state of Holy Spirit, but without God's blessing, it would have been very difficult for him to face this overflowing demon hound. Reality proved that Macne's premonition was correct. In just a minute, Nero easily defeated him. The demon hound leader didn't even use his full strength. He didn't even have the ability to use his second and third head's special abilities. This result was naturally within Caesar's expectations. He had specially called Nero back from the Firmrock stronghold in order to cut off Macne's thoughts of regaining his freedom in a short period of time, so that he could return to the central battlefield as Darkblade as soon as possible. After the battle ended, Caesar stood up from the spectator stand and sighed. He unconsciously wagged his tail, perhaps testing his patience. Just when he couldn't help but want to visit the elven forest, Luna actually brought Odin back from her parents' place. This should have been a good thing, allowing Caesar to ease his lovesickness. But after returning, Luna seemed to be deliberately avoiding him. She didn't even give the black dragon any face when she saw him. He didn't know what she was throwing a tantrum for. "I have to go and coax her." Caesar snorted, two puffs of white smoke coming out of his nostrils. "I have to settle this matter today. I can't let it drag on any longer." He returned to the court with his head drooped. Most of the time, Luna stayed with Caesar in the treasury of the empire. However, she also had her own little room. It was a sea of green. The green vines that were nourished by magic grew uncontrollably. They covered every corner of the palace and built a room that was isolated from the rest of the world. The vines weaved together and gathered together to form a green ceiling. Golden sunlight shone down from above and cast a mottled shadow on the ground. When Caesar came in, Luna happened to not be there. She had probably disguised herself and ran out to play cards again. She didn't take care of the child, leaving Odin alone in the room as if it was chasing something. Caesar pushed open the door and took a step in. The Hui dragon just happened to crash into his arms. Ow! With the hardness of Caesar's body, crashing into his body was no less than crashing into a mountain of obsidian. The armor on his chest made a dull sound. Odin was not dizzy by this blow. If it wasn't for Caesar holding him, he would have fallen to the ground. "What are you chasing so recklessly?" Luna wasn't there, so Caesar could put on an act and show the dignity of father. With a straight face, he asked Odin, who was in his arms. "Bird, goo-goo bird." Odin was dizzy. As he spoke, he stretched out his hand and made two grabs in the air. Because of the influence of her maternal lineage, Odin's aesthetic was more inclined towards humanoid creatures. Therefore, she preferred to move and display herself in the form of humanoid creatures. "What bird?" Caesar asked in confusion. His psionic perception spread out evenly and spread out in the room. Soon, he found that there was another living creature in the forest room, a curly-tailed sparrow. This was a relatively rare spirit creature. It was alert and lively, had a certain level of intelligence, and was very fast. However, it was not aggressive. It was a subspecies of the wind element and was recorded in the supplementary reading of the Illustrated Handbook of Magical Beasts. At this moment, the creature was perched between the vines. It turned its head and looked in this direction vigilantly. Wind elemental energy condensed into a solid form and flowed between its long tail, emitting specks of light. Caesar hooked his claws at it, and the curly-tailed sparrow flew over obediently. "Child, you have to learn how to use your racial talent. As a pure-blooded true dragon, The suppression of the bloodline makes it unable to disobey your orders. I'm just playing with it, Odin explained. All right. Caesar patted her head. Tell me, where did this little fellow come from? I remember that the royal court didn't keep such a spirit creature. I was the one who caught it. Odin raised her head and looked at Caesar proudly. She looked like a child who was asking for praise. It's in the royal city. You sneaked out again, Caesar lectured her in a doting manner. After thinking for a while, he summoned the orc guards and asked them in detail. The curly-tailed sparrow came from a group of merchants from the mainland. They set off from the Arzala area, and their first stop was the Blackwing Royal City, the most representative city in the north. The curly-tailed sparrow was one of the most precious goods in this group of merchants. In the end, it was seen by little Odin, who sneaked out for a stroll. She cast a spell and caught it. The merchant group still didn't know who did it, and they were still looking for the thief. Just as Caesar was listening to the orc guards report the whole story, Luna also came back from outside. She didn't leave Odin behind and run out to play cards by herself. Instead, she wanted to go to the arena to find Caesar to talk about Garcia. In the end, one of them went and the other came back, and the two of them just missed each other. And in the midst of these twists and turns, Luna also came back from outside. She also wanted to find Caesar, so she went to the arena and just so happened to miss him. After hearing about the curly-tailed sparrow, Caesar didn't care much. He knew that Odin didn't deliberately break the rules of the royal city, but it was an instinct during the process of growth. It was a possessive desire for something that it liked, just like all young children. Unlike the true dragons in the material plane, Odin and Caesar didn't inherit the dragon's legacy. Their knowledge of the world had to be slowly built up. This was a process. When the little dragon grew up, this kind of thing shouldn't happen. Find that caravan, pay them a little more, and buy the curly-tailed sparrow. Caesar ordered the draconic guards. After all, Odin was still a child and needed some playmates. These harmless fine creatures were better than the other young Penishade dragons. However, Luna wasn't satisfied with this solution. No. She flapped her wings and floated in front of Caesar and Odin, saying sternly, "We can't just let it go like this." In the elven forest, this kind of behavior is seen as theft and robbery. It's absolutely not allowed. The curly-tailed dragon did something wrong. It should apologize to the victim and be punished. But after hearing his mother's words, Odin was a little confused. He tilted his head and asked, "This land belongs to the Empire, and Father is the master of the Empire. These things originally belonged to our family." Luna couldn't find any words to refute Odin's question. She was a little anxious and said angrily, "That still belongs to your father, not you. Don't worry." Caesar also carried the little fellow over and comforted him. He already knew what Luna wanted to teach Odin. So the black dragon thought for a moment and said to Odin, "Child, in theory, what you said is correct. But think about it. If that's the case, why should I pay that caravan?" Chapter 537. Because Odin tilted her head and thought for a while, then said, "Father thinks that the merchants are pitiful." Pitiful? Caesar seemed to find this word interesting. He grinned and said, "They're indeed pitiful for losing rare goods for no reason, but this is not the reason why I paid them. The reason why I paid them is that this is the law of the Empire. But I heard from Hogg that the law was compiled and issued by Father." Odin asked doubtfully, "Father is the master and ruler of the Empire, and he also has to abide by these things?" It feels like tying myself up with a rope." "Tying yourself up?" Caesar said, "Actually, it's not wrong to say that. The Empire's law was issued by the Tangerine family, but except for some special circumstances, we should also abide by these rules." "Why?" "Because if we don't do this, the Empire's system will collapse," Caesar said. As the heir of the Empire, it was time for Odin to establish some concept and understanding of the country. The black dragon did not explain this sentence more, but asked his daughter in return, "My child, what do you think we use to rule this country and make this country run?" "Power." In response to this question, Odin blurted out without hesitation, "Father is the most powerful individual in the world. Even Asliers can't beat father. From her teacher, Big Eye Corgi, Odin learned that the bottomless abyss was the enemy of all worlds, and the demon lord was one of the most powerful creatures in the astral world. However, she found that the abyss lord Asliers was not her father's opponent. The powerful Flame King was now locked in a cage called Black Rock Mountain. Caesar took her there to have a look and also warned her not to go too deep. Odin's admiring tone and eyes made Caesar quite happy. He nodded approvingly. Yes, power is the foundation and guarantee for us to ascend to the throne, but it is the rules that make the empire stable and prosperous and continue to run. If the empire is compared to a flock of sheep, then the Tangerine family is the shepherd. We have the power to kill the sheep, but we don't have the energy and time to control each sheep. When the number of sheep exceeds what we can see, we must establish a set of suitable rules to manage the sheep and let them restrain themselves. Otherwise, it will cause chaos and disaster. But after saying so much, Odin's eyebrows furrowed. Her question had yet to be answered. Father, you still haven't told me, as shepherds, why do we have to follow the rules of the sheep? Shoo! Caesar winked at her and made a shushing gesture. He deliberately lowered his voice and said, because the sheep don't know what shepherds are. They only see us as the leading sheep. This is good. It can create a sense of identity and security for the sheep, but at the same time, there is a problem. As shepherds, we also have to follow the rules of the sheep. Is that so? Odin nodded in confusion. Yes, the rules of the flock need to be obeyed by every sheep. This is the basis for the cooperation and coexistence of the flock. If they find that a sheep can violate the rules without being punished, more and more sheep will try to break the shackles. In this way, the shepherd will have a hard time. He will have to pay a high price, such as killing a lot of sheep, to make the flock stable and obedient again. Caesar said, this is the result that all shepherds don't want to see. Luna frowned as she listened. Caesar seemed to have completely misunderstood her meaning. The little dragon might not understand, but she always felt that Caesar's shepherding theory contained some kind of deep meaning. Thinking about it carefully, her heart trembled. It was completely different from the concept of a country that she had received in the elven forest. However, with Luna's little brain, she still couldn't understand the true meaning of this theory after thinking for a while with a bitter face. Seeing the black dragon seriously teaching his daughter, she was too embarrassed to interrupt. In the end, she could only throw this question to the back of her mind and not think about it anymore. Let's go back to what your mother said before. Caesar continued, as a member of the royal family, you broke the rules and stole other people's things without special circumstances. You violated the laws of the empire, so you must be punished. Regarding this, do you accept? Hearing that she was going to be punished, Odin subconsciously stole a glance at her mother, who usually doted on her the most. In the end, she found that Luna also had a serious look on her face. The little dragon pouted and showed an aggrieved expression. Everyone makes mistakes, even the gods. It's not a big deal. Caesar squatted down and looked into Odin's eyes. His tone became gentle as he said, but as the descendant of Tangerine and the future master of the empire, after making a mistake, you should first have the courage to face your mistakes. You can't lie. You can't escape. Child, we don't need you to apologize to anyone, but you should at least be honest with yourself and know whether what you did was right or wrong. Your mother doesn't really want to punish you. She just hopes that you can take this opportunity to learn from experience and avoid making the same mistake again. Then, okay. Odin's expression was still a little reluctant, but she still nodded and floated in front of Luna. Mother, I was wrong. I'm willing to accept the punishment. Well, considering that you didn't know whether what you did was right or wrong before, this is your first mistake. Luna hugged her and said, your punishment is to send the things back yourself, then apologize to the owner of the caravan and take out money from your own treasury to compensate. After that, you're not allowed to run out for 3 days. Go to Teacher Corgi's magic class obediently. Okay. Odin hung her head and left the room with the curly-tailed sparrow, accompanied by the orc guards to the capital. Seeing Odin leave, Caesar breathed a sigh of relief. He also didn't have any experience. It was his first time playing the role of teacher, and he wanted to shape the child's view of the world that he thought was correct. Oda might not be able to understand some things in a short time, but the child probably remembered about courage and honesty, admitting mistakes, and taking responsibility, experience, and lessons. Caesar's mood had just become lively, but when he looked up, he saw Luna staring at him with an unfriendly expression. His heart sank again with a thump, and he had to bite the bullet and ask. The next second, Luna jumped on his head, hugged the black dragon's ear, and pulled it up. She said angrily and fiercely, "You bad guy, you have to tell me clearly today. What's going on between you and Her Highness Jessie?" Huh? Caesar was confused. Me and Jessie? There's nothing. There's nothing. Then why did Odin call Her Highness Jessie Little Mother the moment he saw her? It made us speechless. Don't tell me that little dragons are born like this. You must have done a lot of bad things behind my back. Hurry up and confess. Chapter 538. After all the twists and turns, Caesar finally managed to smooth things over. After he patted his chest and guaranteed, although Luna's eyes were still skeptical, she finally stopped pursuing this matter. In fact, the little fellow wanted to have an open and honest talk with Caesar. If he really had an unusual relationship with Garcia, he should have done all his responsibilities for Garcia and not just ignored and turned a blind eye to it. However, Caesar had repeatedly vowed righteously that he did not do anything, so Luna could not bring up this matter again. She glared at him with a meaningful warning look, then flapped her wings and left. She was still worried about Odin, so she planned to follow and take a look. Phew! Looking at Luna's disappearing back, Caesar breathed a sigh of relief again. It seemed that Luna and Odin, these two little fellows, could not make him worry less. In contrast, it was more comfortable to throw himself into work. Nelly Andrea opened his eyes and exhaled 2 streams of sulfuric breath. He changed his lying posture and slowly stood up from the ground. A brief dizziness came from his brain, and the exhausted and weak body made the red dragon groan uncontrollably. "Damn Emperor Tangerine," he muttered angrily. How could I believe what he said? These evil black dragons should be thrown into the abyss. Dragon Mother should not have created them at all. But Caesar was a dragon with a different body. Nelly knew this, but he could not help but curse him along with the entire black dragon race. Anyway, these guys were not good people. The black dragon were all cunning, incompetent, and reptiles that only knew how to hide in the shadows. This made the red dragon despise them and feel ashamed to mention them. After throwing Macne, Thunderblade, to the north, Nelly noticed his abnormality on the way back. In just a short while, his mental state was no longer as good as before. He became dull and drowsy, as though he had aged a few hundred years in an instant. The red dragon's scales were no longer bright, and the accelerated loss of nutrients had dimmed them. Even his skin was sagging, and his abundant strength was hidden. Nelly realized that there was a huge problem. He quickly stopped to check his body. It was not difficult, as it was an innate ability of the divine race. The process was also very simple. Soon, Nelly discovered that after the battle with Macne, Thunderblade, he had lost nearly 420 years of his life. This terrifying discovery almost made the red dragon faint. Dragons were long-lived species, and their experience of the passage of time was completely different from short-lived species. But that did not mean that they did not have a sense of time. 420 years was equivalent to the time Nelly grew from his prime to an ancient dragon. This was a rather long period of time, enough to witness the rise and fall of short-lived species. His life stage had leaped to the level of an ancient dragon, but Nelly's strength did not increase, but instead decreased. Not only did he not obtain the magic attainments that matched an ancient dragon, his physical fitness was constantly weakening. He realized in horror that due to the weakening of his strength, he could not maintain the consumption of his huge body. His body was still uncontrollably absorbing vitality to maintain its balance. If this went on, he might die. More importantly, due to the loss of vitality and entering the state of an ancient dragon, he had completely lost the ability and desire to reproduce. One must know that before this, he was only a young dragon. Although he had a few partners in the long years, they were all just one-off encounters. He didn't have the time to seriously reproduce. Until now, he was still a single dragon. Survival and reproduction were the natural duties that dragons had to seriously fulfill. Io, the nine-faced dragon god. Under the effect of the species' reproduction genes carved by the ancestors, Nellie's brain could not help but be filled with despair. This emotion almost made the red dragon hug his head and cry. Caesar. When a projection formed by magic appeared above Nellie's head, he almost ignored everything and roared at the sky. Raging flames of anger burned the red dragon's brain. He wanted to attack and bite that black figure. Even with his current strength, it was no different from a moth flying into a flame, but Nellie felt that it was worth it. Just as the red dragon was in a frenzy, the ghostly psionic fire also burned and flashed around him. You want to use the power I gave you to deal with me? Caesar glanced at him carelessly and said, Wake up. I don't plan to kill you, but don't play yourself to death. Damn Black Dragon. The Black Dragon Emperor's words made Nellie force himself to calm down. He restrained his impulse to use his power and said while panting, This is a fatal poison, a bone-eating worm. It will push me to death. You lied to me. No. Caesar shook his head. I told you that the psionic seed is a secret weapon. You can get a huge boost because of it. You can awaken it at the critical moment when you deal with Macne. Pay attention. It's the critical moment. You hid the truth. Nellie roared. You didn't say that the boost in power was exchanged with the price of my life. Isn't that the obvious truth? Caesar spread his claws and leaned his body on the huge throne, making a helpless gesture. The bard said that all the gifts in fate have a hidden price. You see, even a human's thoughts are deeper than yours, the red dragon. You can't be so naive as to think that psionic energy comes out of nowhere, right? Energy is conserved. Do you understand? Nellie opened his mouth. And according to my estimation, if you take it seriously, you only need to burn 120 years of your life to complete the capture of Macne. 120 years is not an unacceptable price for us, the long-lived species. Black Dragon grabbed the two sides of the iron chair with his forelimbs and leaned forward like a humanoid creature. His eyes flashed with a dark golden luster, and his tone became fierce. It's you. You fell into the unwarranted arrogance brought about by power. You squandered your life recklessly, and now you're telling me that it's my fault. Do you still think that I should bear the consequences for your ignorance and incompetence? Could it be that it's not? Nellie was a little confused. The Red Dragon's way of thinking meant that they were not good at sophistry. He did not know what was going on. It was clearly the Black Dragon's concealment and deception that caused him to be hurt. But now, after the exchange, all the mistakes were made by him. Caesar Tangerine was angry like a victim who had been wronged. In fact, since the beginning of history, this situation often happened in the exchanges between the Red Dragon and its close relatives, the Pinochet dragons. Whether it was the Blue Dragon, the Green Dragon, or the Black Dragon, they always had the upper hand in the exchange of words with the Red Dragon, playing them in circles. But the Red Dragon was not without a solution. They would open their mouths and spit fire, beating the other party up. Although they did not have the advantage in terms of intelligence, the Red Dragon always won in the dragon civilization where strength reigned supreme. Unfortunately, Nellie was now facing Caesar, a black dragon who could beat up Iradia dragons and talk directly to Tiamat and Bahamut. All right, I know you have resentment in your heart. I can understand. Pausing for a moment, Caesar's voice became gentle again. He said in an almost solemn tone, After all, you pledged your loyalty to me and contributed to the Imperium, only to end up like this. I don't think anybody would feel good about it. But fortunately, these mistakes are not without a remedy. You have a solution? The Red Dragon's eyes suddenly brightened. Recently, the Empire has made a breakthrough in the study of undead life. The technology of life siphoning and life bestowing has gone from theoretical to experimental stage. My necromancers are very experienced in manipulating living bodies. They are not turning you into a bone dragon. but extracting energy from the undead to fill the gap in your body. After all, the essence of life energy is the same. Caesar played with his nails and said casually. Nelly raised his head and looked at him suspiciously. "You're not lying to me again, are you? Of course you can choose not to accept it." Caesar wagged his tail. I accept. Seeing that the black dragon was about to turn off the magic communication, Nelly hurriedly shouted. He thought for a moment and asked tentatively, "You said before that all the gifts in Fate have a price tag. What do you need me to do this time?" "You've become smarter. That's good." Caesar smiled. "As a reward for capturing Macne, you now have the right to command an army of dragonkin in the Empire. My necromancers will also follow this army to your side. After your body recovers, I want you to return to the Central Trade Federation and do everything you want to do, everything a real red dragon should do, in the name of Nelly Andrea's Burning Wing. That's simple. I said before that Tangerine would not lie. This is the power and strength I promise to bestow upon you." Chapter 539. Fonin, the town of Turbulent Creek at the border between Thorny Thorn Fortress and Balvo Forest. It was famous in the south for its rich wood resources and minerals. This town had a long history. As early as the Second Age, during the War of the Orcs, humans migrating to the north had fought with the orcs here. After the Central Federation was established, the second head of state erected a monument to the heroes of mankind by the lake in the woods of Turbulent Creek Town. It was to let the people who settled in the Central Federation remember the past and become wiser, braver, and more resilient. Now, the defeat of the Thunderblade Dwarves in Coer had been known by the people of the city. Whether the people were willing or not, a new war was imminent. The airship of Fonin directly transported the army to the camp by the woods of Turbulent Creek Town. Some of the warriors who were lucky enough to escape from the previous battles gathered again under the propaganda of the city for rewards and glory. In the past, Turbulent Creek Town was also very prosperous and noisy. But now, because of the large number of troops stationed in the town, there was a layer of uneasiness and restlessness before the war. There were often soldiers causing trouble in the taverns and inns in the town. They formed small groups and fought with each other. Even if the city's upper management tried to restrain them, it was still impossible to prevent bloodshed because there were just too many people. Except for the head of state's guard stationed in the holy city of Pudasius, almost all the forces of the city were gathered here. After several setbacks, Tashanmu still managed to gather 70,000 soldiers and filled the historic logging and mining fields of Turbulent Creek Town to the brim. War golems exuding a cold aura stood tall in the military camp. There were also dozens of magic cannons placed in the open space in front of the camp. The soldiers quickly built fortresses with the help of the spellcasters. They also dug trenches and cut wood to make many sharp barricades. The Griffin Knights kept going up and down between the camps, maintaining order and inspecting the preparations of each camp. For some unknown reason, as the head of the city, Tashanmu did not personally come to command the army. Instead, he handed it over to the governor of Fonin, Wayandarium. Sickle of the Holy Judgment, Wayan was the most famous noble in the city. He was also a powerful and devout legendary paladin. Now, the army under his command was quite complicated. There were elite troops who had participated in several battles, new recruits and mercenaries who were uneasy and had just been recruited, some militias who voluntarily took up arms to resist the invasion, and some private soldiers who were under pressure from the nobles. It could be said that this was the largest military operation launched by the Trade Federation since the beginning of the Third Era. Tashanmu and his commanders had already made up their minds to fight the invaders of Azeroth in Fonin's Turbulent Creek Town, which was the only way to reach the core of the Trade Federation's territory. Ironically, although this war had been going on for a long time, and the Trade Federation had already lost nearly half of its territory and control of 4 cities, they still did not have a clear idea of the overall strength of Azeroth. They did not know how much strength the enemy had left. This made the commanders' hearts heavy. Moreover, the recent news was all bad. For example, the Red Dragon, Nelly Andrea, who had previously cooperated with the city, had betrayed them. Also, the king of the dwarves, Thunderlord Macne Thunderblade, had been captured. To the governor of Fanon, Wayan Darim, he felt as if he was facing a monster in the shadows. Before it took the initiative to walk out of the dark mantle, no one would know how powerful it was. Fear was inevitable, but it was not a reason to avoid the battle. In this battle of life and death, the loser could lose everything. The enemy is here. In the area where Balvo Forest, Thorn Stronghold, and Turbulent Creek Town intersected, the Sharp Griffin Knights saw Azeroth's army crossing the mountain range. They quickly grabbed the reins and rushed back to the human camp. They had to be fast. Azeroth's giant eagles would also scout the route of the army. Once they were entangled by the eagles, it would be very difficult for the Griffin Knights to escape without backup. The enemy is here. More than 10 minutes later, after receiving the news from the scouts, the city-state camp woke up like a giant beast. Every gear of the war machine began to operate. Sparks of courage flashed in the collision. The veterans picked up their weapons and handed the jugs of wine to the nervous recruits. The generals rode back and forth in front of their own camp, shouting to cheer everyone up. Duke Durasos and his guards were stationed at the back of the infantry phalanx. After the battle began, he would take over the command of the battlefield. On the other hand, Vondarim was standing at the front of the battle line with 2,000 paladins. He knew that Ersala had a deadly weapon called Black Fong, which could intimidate an army and wipe out an entire race without firing a single shot. Every single one of them was a terrifying killer, and death followed wherever they went. However, they were not invincible. Macne Thunderblade had destroyed them before, and Wayan believed that he and his paladins could do the same. Archers in position. Cavalry in position. Magic cannons ready. Activate war golems. Along with the commander's hoarse roar, flags of various colors were slowly raised at the front of the battle line. In such a great battle, there's only one meaning to raising the glorious war flag: to stay in one's post and fight to the death without retreating. This was the final battle. At least in the eyes of the soldiers and commanders on the battlefield, the Trade Federation had invested all their forces in this battle. This battle was bound to be a desperate battle for the fate of the city-state. Roar! A dragon's roar sounded in the sky above Turbulent Creek Town. In the intimidating ferocity, the huge red dragon flapped its wings and flew across the sky above Azhara's army. Behind it were hundreds of ferocious-looking radiation dragon descendants. Nelliandria let out a roar, his dragon wings flapping with tiny flames. The Black Dragon Emperor did not lie to him. The senior necromancer from the north used a magic method that the red dragon could not understand for the time, being to instill a powerful life magic into him, allowing the sickly red dragon to recover to his prime. Now, Nelly could not wait to show his strength. In the narrow middle world, it was rare to see such a terrifying and blood-boiling war. He looked at the human soldiers who were ready for battle with a critical gaze, wanting to see the weakness and fear in the soldiers' posture. But there was none. Under the united will, individual weakness was covered up by the collective strength. He could only see the warriors who were ready to fight to the death, and the steel-like determination of these humans. In the face of fear that descends from the sky, even brave warriors will become cowards. The red dragon laughed contemptuously. He turned his head and looked at the dragons behind him, enjoying the feeling of being surrounded by a large group of people. So before Azhara's army attacked, Nelly could not help but shout, "My dragons, in the name of Andrea Burning Wings, destroy them." Screech, screech, screech. The ear-piercing screeches of the flying dragons reverberated in the air. They were no ordinary low-intelligence dragonkin. Instead, they were mutated monsters that had been baptized by radiation. Although they were the weakest of the Black King's bloodline, they still possessed an irresistible power for mortals. The radiation-flying dragons screeched as they swooped down toward the human army that was waiting for them. The moment they landed, the wing blades on their wings and the bone-chilling wind brought forth the first wave of a feast of blood. But just like when Caesar attacked the northern soldiers, the humans of this world had researched many countermeasures against dragons. They would not passively take a beating. Spellcasters, raise the barrier. The mages arranged in the core of the army began chanting in unison. A single person's power was weak, but when the mages gathered together, the elemental energy that gushed out could be said to be vast. After the magic took effect, the elemental energy rapidly gathered in the air to form a barrier shining with golden flames, enveloping every army formation. Chapter 540. Riding on his armored black warhorse, he calmly drew his bow. In less than a second, the holy light shield around the brave Saint Samurai was torn apart. The moment the Saint Samurai sensed the threat and turned around, he had already galloped past him. The sharp and cold sickle-shaped sword brushed past the paladin's neck. It was not smooth, but it was very useful. The paladin's head flipped in the air and finally fell on the blood-stained battlefield. When the paladin's eyes dimmed, he saw the flank of the allied army being flooded by the cavalry. Covered in fine steel armor, only Maknae Darkblade's eyes were exposed as he overlooked the battlefield. He was a warrior who liked to charge head-on. Even after joining the Blackwing Empire's camp, he still adhered to the nature of a warrior. On the battlefield of Turbulent Creek Town, he led the Northern Imperial Knights to charge. This area was surrounded and cut off by the soldiers of the Blackwing Empire. They could not even hold on for 30 minutes. The difference is too big. Looking at the soldiers fleeing in the burning ruins, Maknae had this thought in his mind. After gaining the command of the Imperial Knights, he realized that whether it was the Trade Federation or Air Sala, the combat power of the Blackwing Empire's army was more than one level lower. The soldiers' fighting will, physical fitness, training intensity, and equipment system seemed to belong to a different era. This was just the unimportant human knights of the Blackwing Empire. If it were the heavy orc infantry, the steam-armored legion, the demon hounds, and the radiation dragon clan, would these cowards in the central region tremble in fear? It seems that the red dragon is right, Maknae said in his heart. They were fighting against something they could never defeat, and the end result would only be being crushed under the iron hooves. Raise our flag, blow the horn, and attack the enemy's core area, Maknae said to the captain behind him. Let's hope that the central people are ready to be attacked from both sides. The same thing was happening on the other flanks of the battlefield, and in some areas. More than 6 troops were launching surprise attacks on the Federal Army from all directions. In addition to the Imperial Knights, led by Maknae, there was also the Stormclaw army from the West Coast Island Ring, the Skeleton Warriors from the Undead Domain, and the Blood Hunters from the Wolfheart Kingdom. From a strategic perspective, the Northern Emperor had lost his patience with the central battle. Under his will, a terrifying dark curtain that was enough to envelop Iradia was cast. In the face of such a huge surprise attack force, only the Radiation Dragonkin, led by Air Sala and Nerit, were attacking the Federation army head-on. But even so, with the advantage of strength and equipment, the Federation army was having a hard time fighting head-on. Governor Wuendarim, who was surrounded by the enemy, gritted his teeth and waved his heavy sword, forcing the powerful opponent in front of him to retreat. His target was Neri Andrea, who was constantly rising and falling in the distance. The Red Dragon's huge size advantage and spitting weapons posed a huge threat to the Federal Army, and he had to be dealt with as soon as possible. However, halfway through, one was stopped. An enemy from the flank swept across the battlefield in an unreasonable manner and rushed to him. The leader of this cavalry was a monster with endless brute force. Every time their weapons clashed, An's arms would tremble. Even with the divine energy constantly repairing his body, one was still at a disadvantage. Bang! But the opponent's warhorse was not as strong as its master. Taking advantage of the opportunity, one cut down the opponent's warhorse with his sword. Then he suddenly jumped up, and with a condescending posture, he slammed his heavy fist on the black steel helmet of the cavalry leader, sending the helmet flying. The cavalry leader rolled on the ground, revealing a face that horrified one Maknae Thunderblade. He shouted in disbelief. You got the wrong person. The dwarf responded in a dull tone. No, you're Thunderlord Macne. The war lines on the face were like clumsy drawings, smeared haphazardly to hide the true face of its owner. He had cut his hair, and even his neck was covered with dark tattoos, but his eyes could not be hidden. One happened to remember. The leader said you're dead. You died under the fangs and claws of the dragon. Until now, the dwarves are still looking for you everywhere. How did you appear here? You're fighting for our enemy? I'm fighting for my clan. Macne, who could not continue to hide, smiled, clenched the scythe-shaped sword in his hand, bent down, pulled off the helmet from a dead body on the ground, put it on, and burst out with an imposing manner. Sorry, I have to kill you. The next moment, Macne's blade was surrounded by faint electric arcs. He suddenly charged and swung his sword at the paladin. The latter's body leaned back and dodged the attack, but the soldiers behind him were not so lucky. Crack! In the sound of the armor being torn, a terrible crack appeared on the body of Anne's personal guard. In the sound of the metal cracking, Macne's attack came again. Bang! One rolled on the ground twice, distancing himself from Macne's fierce and brutal attack. Because of the ups and downs of his emotions, he was caught off guard by his opponent, but now, the state of the paladin had slowly calmed down. God bless. Golden wings appeared on Anne's back, and scorching holy light wrapped around his heavy sword. He floated from the ground, holding an endless column of fire in his hand. Once upon a time, you were like me, the embodiment of justice walking in Iradia, the lighthouse that gave light and hope to the people. But now, you have betrayed the holy oath and fallen into the claws of the dragon. I will punish your filthy soul. Holy slash! In the extreme flames of the paladin, all creatures that he regarded as enemies within close range were silently ignited. When he swung his long sword, Macne raised his sword to block, but he could not block the burning holy flame. The flame locked onto Macne and burned the legendary warrior's body. I used to respect you, but now you have lost the favor of God. Are you still worthy of the name of the Lord of Thunder? One attacked again. Your ugly soul should be purified. Since the moment I gave up the hammer and axe, I am no longer the Lord of Thunder, Macne growled. I am Darkblade. The next moment, Anne's vision turned black as if he had been hit by a siege hammer. He fell backward, flipped a few times in the air, and smashed into the archers behind him. He hit several archers in a row before landing on the ground. The paladin gasped, looked up, and saw Macne's tall figure in front of him. The burning holy flame desperately wanted to lick his body, but it could only rub his armor. Dark red sparks of lightning danced on his body. Soon, the flames around McNeil's body turned into sparks and were extinguished, devoured by the strange lightning. Chapter 541. Just as the war in the Central Trade Union was in full swing, Caesar quietly left the Northlands. His target was the descendant of the goddess of magic, Felinraft. The red dragon had been thrown out as bait, but the prey had yet to appear. Taking this opportunity to fly to the Central Trade Union for a look around wasn't a bad idea. After all, apart from conquering the new continent of Vilost, Caesar had never really stepped out of the Northlands to explore the other realms of Iradia. This was a good implementation of his strategy of hiding when he was young. Now, Caesar had become a monster close to a god, a super evil dragon 70 meters long. In fact, if he didn't deliberately control his size, this guy's size could be even more exaggerated. Under such circumstances, exploring the other realms of Iradia was just fun. Unfortunately, due to Caesar's gigantic body and terrifying aura, his hopes of admiring the lives of humans from above were dashed. When they discovered a terrifying evil dragon circling above their heads, it was likely that no one would be in the mood to do anything else. So, if he wanted to integrate into the humanoid world, he could only rely on psionic transformation. He couldn't use his second form like he did in the Northlands. The first stop of his journey was Corinthia. Before he set off, Caesar received a strange report. The report said that a terrifying giant as magnificent as a titan had appeared at the border of the Andri kingdom. There were many legends and debates surrounding this giant, but the locals all agreed that he or she had some kind of divine power. The gods could only look at Eladia through the dimensional wall, using the eyes of their believers. If they directly descended upon the prime material plane, they would usually be greatly restricted and weakened. Furthermore, they would not be able to maintain their form for long periods of time. However, rumors about giants had already appeared 3 years ago. They had already been active for a very long time. A god or abomination that walks on the material plane. Caesar was fine. He had always been indifferent to things that didn't affect him, so this news didn't attract him much. However, Odin was quite curious. When the Black Dragon was reading the report, she happened to be beside him. After reading it, the little dragon immediately flapped her wings and circled Caesar. "Father, let's go." Odin waved her fist at the sky. Legends say that evil creatures feed on the gods. If they eat them, they can live forever. It must be the same for our race. Let's go, let's go. I haven't seen a real god yet. Who told you these groundless rumors? I've never eaten a god. Caesar stretched out his claws to grab her and said helplessly, "Stop circling around me. You're going to make me dizzy, just like your mother." Corgi told me. If we aren't evil beings, then who else is? Odin, who was in fairy form, used her hand to support Caesar's hooked toe and pulled herself out. "Let's go. Father, take me out to play." "Well, we're not evil creatures." Caesar thought for a while and said, "We're of the legendary race. Also, don't eat intelligent creatures," he added. "What?" Odin tilted her head and asked. "Anyway, it's best not to eat them." Caesar scratched his chin with his other claw and coaxed, "If that giant is really a god or an abomination, it's too dangerous to get close to him. I can't take you there. You can't leave the Empire yet. At this age, you should first learn how to protect yourself." I know. Just like when you were a child." Odin said enthusiastically. "Mother said that when you were a child, you always hid in a cave, gnawed on trees and soil, made grass with summer grass, and imitated the cries of other creatures to hunt." Do I need to tell this to Odin? Caesar complained loudly in his heart, but his expression did not change. As a Penachet dragon, a young dragon is always surrounded by danger. I didn't have such good conditions when I was a child, so you should work harder and surpass your father now. Lecturing again, Odin's little face fell, and she quickly changed the topic. "Father, you can go to that place without me." Looking at Caesar's puzzled expression, Odin hugged his scale and begged, "I haven't seen a real god yet. Father, can you catch it to play with me?" Black Dragon was stunned. "Catch a god to play with you? Well, is it difficult?" "Easy. I hope that guy is not a projection." Caesar narrowed his eyes, and dark golden lines appeared on the edges of his body. The huge umbrella-shaped sonic boom cloud that was dragging his tail suddenly disappeared, leaving only the terrifying sound waves spreading in all directions. Andria Kingdom, Corinthia's sky, Crown Mountains. So weak. Acilios smashed the magic barrier with a punch, then raised his leg and kicked the ancient golden dragon in front of him down the cliff. He laughed loudly and roared, "Die, weak dragon." The dragon's roar came from below. If Caesar was here, he would find that he recognized this roaring dragon. It was the only metal dragon he had dealt with several times, Gilded Fire Stannis. This wasn't a coincidence. As the true dragons of the lawful good faction, the golden dragons hated all forms of injustice and crime. They loved to punish the evil and promote the good. They were especially fond of disguising themselves as humanoid creatures to carry out adventurous activities. At the same time, they had a long lifespan, which was why they were involved in almost every major event, including the crusade against the abomination Ashalites. Actually, Stannis would not have appeared here. After seeing the power of the Black Dragon Emperor, the ancient golden dragon no longer had confidence in this world. Also, he was very old. Not long ago, Stannis had just resigned from the important position of the leader of the Metal Dragons and announced that he would not participate in the gatherings of the Gold Dragons. He was going to meditate for a period of time and enter the ancient dragon stage of hibernation, becoming an ancient dragon or welcoming death. But at this time, a young female dragon was imprisoned and humiliated by a giant in the crown of the heavens. This news made the entire Golden Dragon tribe furious, and they immediately organized to rescue her. But most of the warriors who went to rescue her did not return. In the end, they found out that the so-called giant was a terrifying abomination of God, so they had no choice but to disturb the elders and ask for help from their leader. Stannis could not refuse the Gold Dragon tribe's request, so he came. This world does not belong to you. The Gold Dragon flapped his wings and rose into the sky and roared, "Go back to your territory. This world is already in ruins." Acilios waved his arms and jumped up to tear off a large piece of the Gold Dragon's scales and flesh, as well as a large amount of blood. The abomination let out a satisfied grin. "It belongs to every creature, but I am the forerunner. The others can only follow behind me." When Caesar arrived at the Heaven's Crown mountain range, the abomination was using delicate techniques to violently dismember the body. Accompanied by the painful howls of the ancient golden dragon, every tearing caused a toothache. At the same time, spatial ripples rippled, causing the Heaven's Crown mountain range to become unstable. Chapter 542. Abomination, Caesar said. This was a powerful and terrifying monster. He had a huge body like that of a titan and was comparable to Caesar. The surface of his body was overflowing with violent energy. This energy wrapped around the ancient dragon's body and kept tearing at the golden dragon's fragile soul. Amidst the dragon's painful cries, Acilios was greatly satisfied. Poor Stannis. Even after death, he would not be able to go to the Platinum Dragon God's divine kingdom. Abominations mostly came from gods. They were the forbidden crystallization of gods and other higher life forms. They were born as powerful monsters and hated all living and dead creatures. The purpose of their existence was to constantly kill and destroy and spread their pain to every living creature. Fortunately, these abominations were either sealed by higher gods or could only wander in the chaotic areas of the astral plane. However, now one had entered Iradia. After putting down Stannis, who had completely lost his life, Acilios raised his head and looked at Caesar, who had appeared on the sky crown. He opened his mouth and revealed a smile full of sharp teeth. "You're late, Black Dragon. How did you know that I would save him?" Caesar focused his gaze on the golden dragon. Obviously, he had recognized the identity of the deceased. "Save him?" Acilios looked at the corpse under his feet in surprise. Then he stepped on the golden dragon's skull and crushed it. No. I mean, if you had come a little earlier, you might have been able to defeat me." He pinched his neck. "Now, I've adapted to this world. Then you're quite smart." Caesar smiled. "Your words are filled with malice." Acilios stared at him and clenched his right hand. Some kind of territory spread out from his body and spread to the entire sky Crown Mountain range, enveloping Black Dragon. Logically speaking, the world will of the material plane will reject all foreign things. Even gods can't easily descend. A guy like you will be killed because of your own powerful and crazy power. Caesar seemed to be oblivious to the changes in his surroundings. He continued to talk to himself. "I'm curious. How did you get into Iradia? Can you tell me?" Roar. The ground shook from Acilios' smug laughter. "Are you confused? All right, I'll fulfill your dying wish. Because you? Me?" A surprised expression appeared on Caesar's dragon face. It was very difficult for an abomination to communicate with other life forms. But the other party was a powerful creature that could rival him and could not be crushed to death like an ant. Therefore, Acilios did not mind saying a few more words. "Your inferior eyes can't see that Iradia is disintegrating and becoming a part of the astral world. These material planes were born in the astral plane and will inevitably return to the embrace of the astral plane." "I know." Caesar nodded and began to discuss seriously with an abomination. "But this process will take millions of years. Considering the size of the world we're in, it might take even longer. But all the influences you have on this world will speed up this process. Achilleo's patience, which was only the size of a fingernail, was rapidly being exhausted. He spoke very quickly and finished a long paragraph in one breath. The birth of powerful life forms, the frequent descent of gods, war and destruction, reconstruction and new life will all speed up the aging of the material plane. And those who try to challenge the rules will cause serious damage to it again and again. For example, an abomination breaking through the boundary wall. Caesar narrowed his eyes. "Put away your annoying eyes," Achilleos said. "In some ways, we are the same. I've been watching this world for a long time, but at that time, the world's defense was still quite stable. However, in the past few hundred years, it has been weakening at an incredible speed. At the same time, a mutated dragon is rising rapidly. Now, even the gods are talking about its name. Say, do you think there's any connection between the two?" Achilleos stared at Caesar and licked the corner of his mouth greedily, devouring the life of the world and turning it into your own use. This is an ability that even the gods covet. The three pillar gods of the abyss asked the demon army to dig a worm-eroded passage through this world. But compared to conquering the world, I think they are more interested in you. Unfortunately, the abyss demons can only follow behind me now. He said loudly, "Demogorgon, can you hear me?" "So," Caesar scratched his chin, "the reason you are here is mostly because of me. You are quite smart," the abomination said in the same tone as when Caesar had said this sentence before and then got into a fighting posture. "I know that you will not tell the secret of devouring the power of the world, but as long as I eat you, I may be able to get that power. I'll tell you." "Huh?" Black Dragon's words made Achilleos' movements slow down. He asked tentatively and uncertainly, "What? If I don't tell you, you guys will probably never stop. Gods, abominations, demons, devils, and other even more troublesome existences. I can't deal with so many things." Caesar spread out his claws and looked troubled. "Then I can only be honest. Actually, I am not a Pinochet dragon, nor am I a dragon with a different body. I'm a celestial dragon that does not exist in the astral world. I am now in my infancy and need to devour the world to grow. Now, give me your divine fire. When I evolve into a collapsing dragon, I will help you attack the god's kingdom." Achilleos took a long time to digest this information. His expression changed from shock to ferocity. "You are playing with me. It's you guys." Caesar pointed to the sky, indicating that there were other gods eavesdropping. "I'm going to crush you." The abomination roared and charged toward the black dragon. "Let's see who will crush who." Caesar, who had played enough, raised his head. The earth trembled, and a crimson lava pillar shot up into the sky from the ground, forming a huge lava pillar that was hundreds of meters tall. Achilleos released his power, and all kinds of domain enhancements were activated. Amidst the roar, it was as if the whole world was shaking. Crimson fire pillars shot up into the sky from the ground like red fountains. The lava exploded into a ring that covered hundreds of miles in an instant. It was as if a beautiful red flower had bloomed between heaven and earth. The heavenly crown mountain range twisted and tilted under the high temperature. Majestic mountains collapsed one after another. Countless animals screamed and fled, but they could not find any place to hide. "Don't learn from Asliers," the black dragon said as he flapped his wings. Golden waves of particles surrounded him. "I am Achilleos, the elemental king." The abomination in the lava roared. "I can crush that weak, evil demon lord you speak of with one hand." From high up in the sky, one could see the entire transformation of the land. The mountain range slowly rose up and floated in the air as if something was bulging out from beneath Achilleos' feet. The earth was torn apart, and below the cracks was an endless sea of crimson lava. A gigantic ball of lava condensed behind Achilleos and kept expanding. He raised his head and looked at the black dragon who was looking down at him from the sky. He clasped his hands together and said, "I seal." A miracle appeared. The crown of heaven's mountain range underwent the most drastic change. Billions of fire elements were replaced with ice elements in an instant. The crown of Heaven's mountain range, which was still a lava inferno a second ago, turned into a frost graveyard in the next second. The temperature here plummeted, and even time was frozen. However, this did not include Achilleos and the lava ball that was constantly churning behind him. Ah! Achilleos roared, and the lava ball exploded with a black dragon at the center. It turned into a substantial shockwave that exploded in circles. The ashes that scattered down made the crown of Heaven's mountain range rain black. Chapter 543. How is it? Are you still alive? Can you still move? Achilleos raised his head and laughed wildly. If you kneel down and beg for mercy now, I may forgive your arrogance and overestimation of your abilities. But soon he could not laugh anymore. A beam of golden light pierced through the thick smoke shrouding the sky like a sharp sword, followed by a second, a third. Thousands of golden beams spread out like the sun spreading its brilliance. Caesar reappeared in the air, looking down with his eyes full of spiderweb-like cracks. He was obviously black, but the scales of his armor were overflowing with a golden luster. Abomination. Achilleos' body tensed up, and his expression became dignified. It was an instinctive reaction when encountering a strong enemy. Abomination was the general name of a group of creatures left behind from the ancient times, including the Cinemanes, Leviathan, and a series of monsters that even the gods feared. Dragons were the best among them. The oldest dragon of Abomination could easily destroy everything, including the gods, and even other creatures of Abomination were nothing in its eyes. In thousands of stories in the astral world, people always liked to mix Abomination with Abomination, but in fact, the two were not the same thing. The most significant difference was that most of the abominations were left behind by the gods and had divine fire, while abominations were left behind by the ancient creatures of the astral world in the primeval times and had nothing to do with the gods. The reason why they were lumped together was that abominations and abominations shared the characteristics of evil and destruction. It was also because of this that they played the role of being wary and targeted by the gods, and together they became the most powerful enemies of the astral world. But don't think that abominations and abominations would fight side by side for a common goal under the background of being in the same camp. The reason why these guys were talked about so enthusiastically was that in addition to their great strength, they were also extremely crazy. They were willing to fight with any creatures, biting and killing until they died. In Achilleos' cognition, besides the gods, the most difficult and troublesome opponent to deal with was Abomination. None of these things left behind from the ancient times were easy to deal with. Fortunately, there were not many of these monsters, and with the passage of time, there were fewer and fewer of them. However, he had encountered one in the prime material plane, Elydia. In an instant, all the information he knew about the Drake emerged in Achilleos' mind. As the most famous Drake of hatred, the Drake was probably the strongest creature in the astral plane apart from the ancient gods and the blue diamond dragons. In fact, there was still no conclusion as to whether the Drake or the blue diamond dragons were stronger, but there was no doubt that the Drake was definitely a life form at the top of the astral plane's pyramid, representing the pinnacle of power in the current system. In comparison, even the most powerful abominations paled in comparison. Achilleos smelled a strong, pungent odor, dried roses. Achilleos. If possible, Achilleos even hoped to keep its skull and make it into a weapon. But of course, this was just a thought. The blood and body fluids of the Drake were highly toxic. Just a small drop of it could destroy an undefended city. Not to mention a young Drake, even an embryonic Drake, would have terrible radioactivity. It was quite dangerous to stay with such a creature for a long time. On the other hand, when Achilleos found that his opponent was a Drake, he was ready to go all out. In a collision of such a level, the loser would definitely be reduced to ashes. At this moment, Caesar had completely entered combat mode. The nuclear fusion had already begun and was still operating. The external manifestation was that the scales of the black dragon were no longer black, but were covered by a golden light. Waves of golden particles spread out with him as the center, rising and falling like the tide. At this moment, he had truly become a sun, bright and blazing, making it difficult for people to look at him directly. The roar opened the curtains of the battle. Caesar stared at the abomination below. He inhaled and gathered the golden particles around him. He opened his mouth and breathed out a breath of destruction. As an opponent of the same level, Acleos's strength was not to be underestimated. The breath of destruction was the greatest respect Caesar gave to the abomination. A circle of transparent ripples exploded in front of the black dragon's mouth. Then, like the detonation of a nuclear weapon, an unprecedented blazing light was ignited. If time was slowed down 1,000 times, it could be seen that before the breath of destruction arrived, the spatial vibrations caused by the powerful energy had already reached the top of the sky. The ground cracked and collapsed. Dust and gravel burst out. This scene lasted for less than a second, because in the next moment, the main body of the destructive breath had already arrived. All matter was disintegrated into dust and vaporized under the high temperature. Ah! On the ground, Alexios roared at the sky. He did not expect the nightmare dragon to use his ultimate move right from the start of the battle. It was a battle of life and death. Under the frantic warning of his senses, the abomination had no choice but to unleash his full strength. With him as the center, the majestic power turned into solid shockwaves that exploded in circles. There was no sound. After the elements and air were compressed to the limit, they exploded above Alexios' head and collided with the breath of destruction. A huge circle of dark ripples spread out like a wave. The ground was lifted up and carried into the distance by the shock waves. Tens of millions of tons of soil and rock were lifted off the continental plate. A large amount of stone and soil were thrown into the sky. Under the high temperature and friction, they turned into magma. Then, as they fell, they cooled and turned into meteorite-like fused substances. Whether it was Caesar or Alexios, their strength was at the peak of the material plane. When the confrontation between the two sides was at its most intense, it would even exceed the limit of the material plane. This was destructive to Iradia. When all the dust settled, it could be seen that the entire top of the Sky Mountain range had been completely reduced to ruins. Alexios stood on a floating elemental carrier. Directly below him was the abyss that led to the bottom of the continent. Magma was rolling and jumping out of the abyss. Phew! Alexios was panting heavily. Under the suppression of the material rules, this body could explode with such power. This was already the limit of what he could achieve. Compared to the native life of Iradia, Caesar Tangerine, every time he used the critical power, he would be strongly rejected and counterattacked by the material plane. In a battle of the same level, this was undoubtedly a huge burden. I can't fight here. Alexios realized that his body was gradually melting like ice. This was an external manifestation that this material body was no longer stable. Under the suppression of the Black Dragon, he was about to reveal his true body as an abomination and obtain the strength of his heyday. But the will of the world would never allow him to walk in the material plane in that state. The huge counterattack that would follow would cause Alexios to be severely injured. It was rumored that the strongest abominations could compete with the will of the world, but he could not do so, so he had to find another way. If you dare to face the real Elemental King, I'll wait for you outside the boundary wall. Alexios tore open the spatial barrier and prepared to leave this annoying material plane. But before he left, he decided to leave some harsh words. Of course, you can also choose to continue hiding here and tremble under the protection of the will of the world. No matter what he said, he still lost. Under the suppression of the will of the world, they, as foreign creatures, could not do anything to Caesar. This was also a public opinion that had been proven by the previous gods. Alexios reluctantly accepted this and decided to leave this annoying material plane and wander outside the boundary wall. He would make a comeback when Iradia was weaker. In Alexios' eyes, this matter had come to an end, But what he did not expect was Caesar Orderonso Tangerine. The mutated drake had actually chased him out. Chapter 544. The vast and boundless astral world was as still as a graveyard. To Caesar's surprise, the astral world was not as dark and gloomy as the universe in his imagination. This space was full of colorful colors. Not far away from the irradial world, a swan-shaped nebula was showing an attractive dark blue color. It was the light emitted by hot dust and gas. It was the huge wreckage left by a celestial life after its brilliant death and explosion. The shock wave of its explosion was still spreading out, and in a way, it had pushed the formation of the irradial world. And further away, the strange astral caterpillar was wandering away. Its body was made of gas and elements, and it fed on the wandering particles in the astral world. It floated in the deep space of the vast universe. It was bigger than a material world, and its total length was close to a light year. Caesar could see it clearly even though he was here. To be honest, Caesar was a little uncomfortable. After all, this was his first visit to the astral world. The environment here was completely different from the material world. If ordinary life forms were exposed to the environment of the astral world, the first thing they would have to face was not lack of oxygen, but being unable to adapt to the sudden decrease in air pressure. When the air pressure dropped rapidly, if they could not exhale the gas in their body quickly, the volume of the gas would double, and their internal organs would expand rapidly. At the same time, the soft tissues and blood vessels of the body would swell to the point of bursting. Liquids that came into contact with the astral world, such as sweat, saliva, and the body fluids around the eyeballs would boil. If these creatures were strong enough, they could survive in the astral world for 1 to 2 minutes before dying. This was the first threshold to enter the astral world, and also a warning to all the creatures who looked up at the stars. Only extraordinary life forms who passed this test were qualified to stand in the deep and mysterious astral world arena. Caesar, who had just entered the astral world for the first time, narrowed his eyes. He felt his muscles ache and his stomach cramp, but that was all. As a legendary life form that mortals could not imagine and understand, his body could adapt to all the harsh environments and adjust itself. This guy had long passed the age where he needed oxygen to survive. The inhaling and exhaling before was just a habit. After a simple scan of the astral plane's environment, Caesar stared at his target, Abomination Alexios. At this moment, Alexios looked completely different from when it was in the material plane. Through the elemental turbulence that surrounded it, one could see a magnificent figure that was 1,000 meters tall. Although it still had a humanoid structure, its body had many physical features that belonged to its power, such as a burning head, a pale crystal-like body, and rock-like limbs. Looks like a bastard born from the chaos of elements. I wonder which god has such a weird fetish. Caesar speculated maliciously. Alexios held a storm blade in his hand, and his eyes were filled with surprise and fury. "Stupid dragon, you dare to step into my territory. Are you ready to meet your death?" Caesar didn't say anything. He raised his chin and signaled him to bring it on. Alexios opened his horrifying mouth and roared silently. Just his mouth alone was the size of the black dragon. If compared to the standards of the creatures in the astral world, Caesar was indeed a little small. The abomination jumped up and strode forward in the starry sky. Wrapped in a storm, it slashed at the dragon with its sharp blade. Before it came into contact with the dragon, the space chaos caused by the elemental turbulence had already hit its face. This was the astral world, the arena of the strongest creatures. Gods, demons, abominations, and abominations could do whatever they wanted here. Alexios exerted his full strength, which was much stronger than when he was in the main material world. Caesar didn't dare to be careless. If he was hit without any protection, half of his body might be cut off. "Law!" Emperor suddenly burst out. Using the joint of Alexios' rock hand that was holding the storm blade as the point of attack, it shattered the space. The entire right arm of the abomination was annihilated by Caesar, and all the elemental energy was thrown into the chaotic void after the destruction. However, such a loss was within the range of Alexio's consideration. The arm quickly reformed, holding the weapon, and slashed at Caesar relentlessly. The counterattack claw on Black Dragon's body was triggered. Few enemies could force him to fight with all his strength and use his psionic energy. The giant Black Dragon claw appeared in front of the Stormblade, slashing at the city wall like a sharp knife. As soon as it touched the Stormblade, it collapsed into elemental turbulence again. The counterattack claw did not stop and slapped Alexio's hard, causing him to stagger. If such a force hit the ground, it would be enough to trigger a super tsunami. Damn it! The abomination shook its head in annoyance. In the previous performance, the opponent did not show any relevant ability, so he did not notice that the opponent was a rare psionic plutonium dragon. This made him even more annoyed and gradually lose control. Your psionic energy is insignificant and useless. Caesar was too lazy to talk nonsense with this guy. He instantly cast another psionic energy surge and then casually threw a psionic bomb at Alexios. It secretly passed through the barrier that Alexios had just put up and then used the body of the abomination as the source of the explosion. An illusory blue flame appeared in the starry sky. The flame tongue licked the body of the abomination, and the body made of elements gradually dissolved into gas. Ah, come back, come back. Alexios roared angrily and grabbed at the gas, trying to take it back into his body. But it was futile. Under the effect of the psionic fire, the gas had lost their original elemental characteristics. This blow caused the Elemental King to suffer a heavy blow that it had never suffered before. Alexios, who was on the verge of losing control, was completely enraged. He screamed that he wanted to tear Caesar into pieces of meat and bones. He kept approaching Caesar, trying to use the advantage of being an elemental to engage in close combat with his opponent. A chase between the two of them began. Caesar flew backward, and the colorful giant abomination chased after him. Although it seemed that he had a firm grasp of the rhythm. In fact, the Black Dragon had a headache because this was not in line with his fighting style. In the past battles, Caesar was keen on crushing the enemy with his body and finishing the target with his breath. Psionic power and command were only supplementary. But now, his opponent was an elemental, and physical damage had little effect on it. When Alexios was prepared, psionic power and command were not very effective. As for the breath, he could only use it twice in a short period of time. He had to look for an opportunity. Arcane power. The abomination began to buff itself with spells. Alexios, who was not very bright, finally realized the problem. The guy in front of him had magic resistance close to that of the strength energy dragon. If he did not strengthen the penetration of his spells would be like tickles to the abomination. You're dead. The furious abomination opened a summoning portal and pulled endless elemental creatures into the astral plane, blocking Caesar's retreat and surrounding him. Little tricks. Caesar flipped his hand and cast Command Crown. This was the scene he was waiting for. An indiscriminate AoE attack crushed all the summoned creatures and broke them back into their elemental state. Then, Alexios welcomed the second baptism of his destructive breath. Under the cover of spotless land, this breath hit the abomination's chest. From the perspective of the abomination's back, it could be seen that a bulge appeared on its crystal-like back, then it expanded and shattered, and then the dragon's breath penetrated through. Alexios' scream almost caused the entire astral world to boil. Regardless of whether it was intelligent or not, any living creature could feel his painful thoughts. The unobstructed dragon breath almost destroyed the abomination, leaving a transparent hole in its huge body. How big was this hole? It was estimated that even if Caesar stretched his wings to the limit, he would still be able to swagger through it unimpeded. But Alexios was not dead yet. Chapter 545. Haha. Achilleos covered his empty chest with one hand. His eyes were filled with pain, and unwillingness. He could no longer speak. His previous bold words had all drilled into the cold hole and disappeared. He's not dead. Caesar felt the breath of life and squinted to size up the opponent's condition. The power of the thermonuclear breath in the astral environment was not as exaggerated as imagined. In order to face future enemies, he had to put the plan of upgrading the energy core on the agenda. If this was an antimatter dragon breath, it should be able to completely disintegrate the abomination and shatter it into the astral debris. Acleosis slowly raised his head. He was recovering very quickly. The divine fire in his body was frantically extracting the free energy of the astral world and converting it into life force and elements to replenish himself. A huge, colorful curtain rose in front of the abomination. The elemental storm roared again, and the huge hole in its body began to condense inwards. Most of the creatures in the astral world had strong vitality. The abominations were one of the most terrifying monsters. When they were severely injured, not only would they not die because of the deterioration of their wounds, but their bodies would also heal rapidly. If one wanted to kill them, one would have to use continuous powerful attacks to shatter their bodies and tear their souls apart. If one could not completely kill these monsters, their hatred would be engraved in their bones. After they recovered, they would continue to hunt and kill until they were dead. How should I deal with this monster? Immunity to conventional physical damage, immunity to mind control, immunity to mind control, immunity to mind control, spell mastery and elemental mastery, gigantic form. Even Caesar felt that it was tricky. At this time, he thought of Asliers. The Balrog King was also an elemental body. Elemental bodies and elemental bodies had the characteristics of devouring and eroding each other. Perhaps the demon lord itself was not a match for the abomination, but it could be transformed into a weapon. After equipping Caesar with it, it should not be difficult to kill the abomination. If Asliers knew what Caesar was thinking at the moment, he would definitely raise his head and look at him with disdain. You actually only use me as a weapon? Who do you think you are? I'm a noble being from the upper realm, the infernal sovereign of the abyss. If you beg me now with a pious attitude and strengthen the Black Rock Mountain series in the Elegy car by 10 times, I can consider it. Just consider it. Unfortunately, the Lord of the Infernal Prison was sleeping in the deep crevice of the Black Rock Mountain. Caesar had no way to wake him up. After all, the relationship between the two sides had not reached the level of intimate. If they wanted to do something together, they had to inform each other in advance. Moments later, Caesar suddenly recalled that Acleosis's power came from the god fire, and he relied on the god fire to provide him with an endless supply of elements and energy to fight. In terms of material creatures, the god fire was almost equivalent to Acleosis's heart, which was his fatal key, and Caesar himself seemed to have the ability to devour divinity. The reason why he used the word seemed was because Caesar had never clearly obtained this achievement ability, and Black Dream had never explained its functions and effects to Caesar in a straightforward way. But from his previous experience, whether it was Malor, Tiamat, or Bahamut's divine fragments, he could devour, digest, and become stronger. This was Caesar's summary of his past experience. I can try. Caesar thought for a moment. As long as he fought Acleosis in close combat, he could touch the core of his huge body without any protection. Then he could tear open the shell of the abomination and touch the god fire, and his guess of devouring divinity could be confirmed. In the process, there was a necessary risk. He might be injured, but it should not be fatal. After a round of confrontation, the battle returned to its original point. The giant Acleosis roared and rushed over, but this time Caesar did not dodge. Instead, he flapped his wings and wanted to fight in close combat. In the fight, Acleosis blessed himself with the aura of glazed fire, and a blazing flame ignited on his fist. He directly used the spatial ability to appear behind Caesar, followed by a powerful innate ability, reenactment, which made all the spells he had cast in the previous battle appear and hit the Black Dragon. Taking advantage of the opportunity, Acleosis smashed down with his fist and in the sound of metal breaking, he tore off the black dragon's wings together with the bones. Your body is weaker than psionic power. Caesar was injured, but this was exactly the opportunity he wanted. Using the ability to control his body to seal the blood vessels and ignore the pain from the wound on his scaled wings, he took the initiative to activate the hormone ability that he had not used for a long time. The crimson crack on his chest shone brightly as he flew up Acleosis's arm at high speed. You asked for it." Acleosis lowered his head. He did not have time to retract his right hand to stop the black dragon, but tentacles appeared on the surface of his body one after another, trying to grab Caesar and drag him into his body. The inside of the abomination's body was a pure elemental purgatory, with never-ending flames and ice storms raging and raging. They would decompose everything that did not belong to the elements in the cruelest way. Caesar noticed this and deliberately slowed down to reveal an opening. When he came back to his senses, he was no longer in the astral world with a deep background. The violent will of Acleosis was manifested here. Endless flames, frost, storms, and rocks rushed towards him. The rocks could not even withstand a punch. Caesar pushed the stone wall away, let out a low dragon roar, extinguished the flames and melted the ice, and began to charge into the depths. His restored wings allowed him to rampage without hindrance. Shock waves swept across with deadly radiation, and the sky was dyed dark gold. He knew very well that this was the inner world of the abomination's body, and the abomination was trying to digest him. He had to end this quickly. Caesar took a deep breath and repeated the abomination's words. "You asked for it." The last breath of destruction was used in Acleosis's body. Then the elemental world exploded. Blazing light swept across every corner of the elemental world, like an overly passionate lover pulling each other into the embrace of destruction. In the light of destruction, Caesar heard the furious roar of the abomination. The annihilation of the elements made the world peel and shatter like a mirror. But at the other end, Caesar found a stable area, which was the divine flame of Acleosis. It was at the core, surrounded by more than one protective layer, and at the same time constantly providing energy to strengthen the protective layer. A complete divine flame. Caesar's pupils constricted. If it was taken out of Acleosis's body, and through a certain ritual, it could directly allow a legendary creature in the prime material plane to ascend to demigod, crossing the most difficult threshold and stepping onto the starting line of the path of immortality. This was something that countless people dreamed of, and even the beings on the throne could not avoid their greed for it. This is really something, but now it's mine. Caesar grinned, revealing his sharp fangs as he endured the throbbing pain in his spirit and the drying up of his psionic energy, and activated the order once more. The dustless land. A pair of invisible hands brushed away the dust in front of him, and the protective layer around the divine flame of Acleosis disappeared without a trace. It was only then that the abomination, whose brain was not so good, finally realized what Caesar was going to do. It was boiling with panic, showing the panic of a being that did not belong to this level. "No. What did you do? How did you do it? How could you?" Black Dragon did not hesitate in the slightest amidst the abomination's shouts, excitedly walking forward and grabbing the still surging divine flame. It was an illusory thing, but he took it out as if it was real. The next moment, Caesar was squeezed out of Acleosis's body. After losing the divine flame, his body rapidly shrank, losing the characteristics of elementization and turning into a distorted monster that seemed to be randomly pieced together by lava and ice. Acleosis was not dead yet, but having lost his source of power, he would degenerate into an ordinary creature. The abomination, who was in this process, looked at Black Dragon in despair, kneeling under the stars and stretching out an arm, wailing, "Give it back to me! I beg you! Give it back to me." Caesar glanced at it, indifferently sucking the divine flame into his mouth. At the same time, Black Dragon's intuition suddenly gave him a warning. He sensed a vast and turbulent divine aura, a divine power that was not suppressed in any way. He realized that there were gods trying to descend in this area, and there was more than one. There was a familiar smell in the divine aura. It was Tiamat, the mother of evil dragons, and Malor, the god of the hunt. They hated Caesar, the dragon variant, and were constantly observing Iradia's situation, waiting for an opportunity to strike. Malor even threatened that Caesar should never leave Iradia's material plane, or he would come and hunt his head. He did not go back on his word. Caesar muttered in his heart. Fortunately, when he left Iradia to pursue Acleosus, he was already mentally prepared. At this time, he was not in a hurry. He gathered his emotions and excitedly and calmly transmitted his thoughts. Talos, they are coming. Talos? When hearing this name, Tiamat obviously hesitated, and Malor's heart trembled. He stopped his descent abruptly and wiped away the traces. As a member of the storm gods, he was very clear about the power of the main god, and this main god had always been coveting the priesthoods of other gods in the pantheon. Even if Black Dragon was likely to be bluffing, he dared not take the risk. Goodbye. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Caesar grabbed the disheartened Acleosus and went into the boundary wall of Iradia's material plane. If Malor, the god of the hunt, really appeared here, Talos might really show up. However, the Lord of Storm was not trustworthy, and the situation was equally bad for Caesar. Following his heart and taking the opportunity to slip away was the best choice now. Chapter 546. Phew. Caesar breathed a sigh of relief after returning to the material plane. Compared to the complicated environment of the astral plane, he still preferred the safety and stability of Iradia. The wonderful feeling of breathing oxygen again made the Black Dragon unconsciously stretch his body, squinting his eyes and showing a comfortable expression. After spending some time to get used to it, Caesar glanced at the abomination that he had captured back to Iradia. The power of Acleosus, who had lost its divine fire, had declined sharply and had now fallen to the legendary realm. Even its intelligence had been affected. Now, it looked sluggish and demented, constantly leaking bleak and despairing gray emotions. Poor guy, Caesar said in a pitiful tone. It seemed that Acleosus was still unable to accept reality and was still immersed in self-doubt. So he sealed this guy with psionic energy and threw it into the alternate space that he had opened up. Caesar did not intend to return to the Blackwing Empire immediately and throw Acleosus to Odin as a toy. Firstly, his journey had just begun. It was not easy for him to leave all kinds of things behind and run out. Secondly, he did not know much about the abomination and was not sure if Acleosus had the possibility of recovering its strength. In order to avoid any accidents, the Black Dragon decided to keep it by his side for observation. After confirming that it was not dangerous, he would hand it over to the clan leader and Odin who were interested in it. In addition, it would also take time to digest the divine fire that he had just swallowed. After thinking about it, Caesar flapped his wings and left the destroyed crown of the skies. He decided to continue touring the various kingdoms in Hudgian land. Even after experiencing the Battle of the Gods, the Black Dragon still did not need to rest and lick his wounds. The fusion furnace provided energy to nourish and repair his body all the time. As a master of psionic energy, Caesar frequently encountered the experience of his spiritual power drying up during training. As long as he did not use psionic energy, that thing could quickly recover. The Andri kingdom was the most common kingdom in Iradia. It was ruled by the royal family and many feudal nobles. This system, which had long been rotten and old in the eyes of Caesar, was still popular in various regions of Iradia. The Andri kingdom was the country with the widest territory and the most prosperous national power in Hudgian land. There were many famous knights and spellcasters. According to historical records, the Andri kingdom had a history of nearly 1,000 years. Like the Trade Federation, it was a product of the human migration period at the beginning of the Third Era. Ancient history brought with it intricate hatred and conflicts of interest. The dirty transactions between the great nobles and slave owners did not stop for a moment. Alliances, betrayals, and alliances were performed every day. All kinds of gods took turns to appear on the stage, spreading their doctrines and fighting for faith. Countless temples stood in the kingdom, and the colorful stories provided countless ideas for bards and drama writers. But recently, with the War of the Trade Federation's division, Arsala's army moving south, and so on, the Andri kingdom was a little quiet for a while. The royal family and most of the feudal lords turned their attention to their eastern neighbors, thinking about whether to take a share of the profits from this war. Corinthia, where the crown of skies was located, was once the center of the Andri kingdom. Today, it was still an important manufacturing and commercial town, the economic center of the Andri kingdom. Corinthia still had a population of nearly 150,000. It was considered a very populous city in Iradia. At the same time, Corinthia was also a rare mixed city, but only limited to humanoid creatures. Among them, there were many halflings, elves, and some dwarves who did not belong to the three-castle system. Caesar soared in the sky above Corinthia, a faint rainbow light flashing above his head. That was the reflection of the energy bursting forth from the battle in the astral plane. The black dragon swung his tail and lowered his altitude. He decided to go to the cities of Corinthia for a stroll. At the same time, he wanted to experience life and collect detailed information about the southern half of the continent. Due to the protection of the royal family, as well as the needs of the surrounding feudal nobles for commerce and the circulation of goods, Corinthia was relatively stable in the disputes between feudal lords. Usually, there were very few wars around the city. Although there were still many brave adventurers and mercenaries in the city, these were all bloody conflicts in Corinthia. But now, it seemed that the city was about to face an unprecedented crisis. The first to receive the news were the temples. Because there were no restrictions on faith, almost all the human, elven, and halfling divine systems had temples in Corinthia. In addition, there were also temples of evil gods and false gods that existed in the dark. More than 5 gods had sent oracles to their believers, indicating that a powerful and irresistible force was rapidly approaching the city. As for those temples that did not receive the oracles, their bishops had also sensed the terrible events happening in the crown of the heavens because of the high perception gained from serving the gods. The Black Emperor, Caesar Tangerine. Its reputation and its unusually ferocious appearance had long spread throughout the Iradia continent. Now that there was an oracle indicating that the dragon was approaching Corinthia, the royal family, lords, and temples were suddenly faced with an urgent problem as to how to deal with the terrible Black Dragon King. In fact, there was no need to be so anxious because soon Caesar's breath could no longer be traced and disappeared without a trace. With the Black Dragon deliberately hiding, even the gods would not be able to track him down in a short period of time. Unlike the other dragons who liked to disguise themselves as human mages in black robes and low hats, or forthright mercenaries, Caesar did not have any special preference for the human form. In the situation where he could not use his second form, he dressed like an ordinary adventurer and traveler. His ordinary posture and appearance, ordinary clothes and accent, and ordinary strength and smell made the 2 spearmen at the castle gate not have any interest in him. Thus, the ordinary adventurer Caesar Tangerine followed behind a team of mercenaries and smoothly entered Corinthia. Although it was close to July and was in the middle of summer, the Andria kingdom was located in the south of Iradia and had a unique climate. The temperature during the hottest time of the year would not exceed 30 degrees Celsius, and it was even cooler in the evening. As soon as he entered the castle, he saw a crowded market. The streets were overflowing with dirty water and littered with rubbish. Caesar knew that apart from the Blackwing Empire, most of the cities in Iradia were like this. He walked straight through the market that was filled with constant hawking. He first went around the weapon and armor shops and blacksmiths of Corinthia and obtained an enchanted dagger, a knight's greatsword, and a set of black-patterned full-body armor that was more for show than defense. This was a shopping experience that was completely different from the Blackwing Empire. The feeling of spending money was indeed very pleasant, especially when one had endless money to spend. The casual play only ended when Caesar received a secret leaflet. He stared at the papyrus in his hand with great interest. It was a woman wearing a gray hood who had stuffed it into his arms in the midst of the crowd. On it was a poem. The dragon's wings cover the sky. The storm sweeps across the earth, holding the authority of the world in his hand, controlling the mystery of life and death. Even the gods are no match for his majesty. When the stars come to the right position, he will whisper and awaken the blazing end of the world. All things will eventually fade away. Everything will be annihilated, leaving only the Black Emperor and his servants to overlook the world. Below the poem was a small line of words. If you're interested in poetry you are welcome to join our gathering at the West Bay Tavern tonight. Caesar revealed a strange expression. If he had guessed correctly, he was most likely referring to himself. This was too interesting. Although there were many races in the Blackwing Empire that worshipped the black dragon as an idol, it seemed to be the first time that he was put on the altar with such exaggerated words. Very good. He liked it very much. The interested Caesar decided to go to the tavern tonight to take a look at this organization. If those fellows were pious enough, he would not be stingy with giving them a real reward. Chapter 547. After nightfall, Caesar walked across the stone arch bridge, ready to join the gathering of worshippers. Every country had the so-called upper-class and lower-class residents. The disparity between the rich and the poor made them seem to live in different worlds. The West Baywan Tavern was located in the slums where it was hard to see the sun all day long. Unlike the commercial district that was still prosperous at night, there was almost no one here at night. Only sneaky outlaws would appear here. However, the situation today was different. Caesar noticed that there were sporadic people in front and behind of him, and their destinations seemed to be the same as his. These guys seemed to have made an appointment. They all wore long robes that covered their bodies and covered their faces in black hoods, keeping a distance from each other and guarding against each other. Caesar strolled leisurely, following behind a pedestrian who was full of religious aura. The group passed through a block, turned left and then right, and entered the shabby shop in the depths of the slums, Zibiwan Tavern. In his impression, gatherings set up in taverns were usually lively events with a large number of people. But after entering the tavern, Caesar found that this was not the case. The tavern at night was bleak and deserted, and there were not many customers inside. They sat quietly in their seats and drank. A waiter stood at the front desk, carefully and patiently wiping the wine glass in his hand. "What do you want to drink?" The waiter raised his head and greeted Caesar, then showed a slightly apologetic smile and added, "There are not many people today, so we may not be able to play cards." Caesar looked around and did not see the person who had followed him before, so he asked, "Where's the last person who came in?" The waiter was silent for a few seconds. "Why are you looking for him?" "I'm here to join the gathering." Caesar took out the papyrus leaflet he had received before. Some kind of sensing spell was triggered. This waiter in the slums was actually a hidden spellcaster, and at this moment, he was investigating Caesar's physical condition. Of course, because the gap between them was too big, the waiter could not get any real information about Caesar. After getting the information that Caesar wanted to show, the waiter, who was originally vigilant, smiled again and raised his chin toward Caesar's back. "Right, take this gentleman in." A man who was originally sitting in a seat stood up and walked to Caesar, nodding at him in a friendly manner. "Follow me." He led Caesar to the kitchen of the tavern, then walked down the stairs, stopped in the basement storage room, and tapped on the dusty and cracked wall. Dong, dong, dong. The slow and sound of the knocking echoed, and Caesar realized that this was a secret door. What happened after entering the tavern surprised him a bit. He did not expect that this gathering was not as loose as it seemed. It was a group of people who worshipped him, was strict and cautious. There were professionals. This casual way of development was incompatible with their current cautiousness. The wall door was pulled open from the inside, revealing a dark and deep passage. The man who opened the door for them met Wright's eyes and nodded to each other. Then Wright stopped, indicating that his mission was over. Caesar, who had a new guide, did not show any special emotions. He followed the other man into the passage without saying a word. The passage was very deep, winding all the way down. Although there were braziers placed about every 20 meters for light, it was still dark and damp. From time to time, water droplets seeped from the rock wall above them, dripping on the ropes, stakes, and other things that were casually piled on both sides of the passage, giving them an unpleasant stench. After turning another corner, the space in front of them suddenly opened up. The builders here had dug a huge cave underground and decorated it like an altar and palace. A statue of the black dragon stood upright against the wall. It spread its huge wings, stretched out its neck, and lowered its head. The scales on its neck were fine and fine. Its fierce head was less than 2 people's height from the ground. People on the altar could even touch its ferocious teeth if they stood on tiptoe. This statue alone was worth a lot. At this moment, many people had gathered in the underground palace, chatting in groups of 3 or 5. Most of these people were wearing black robes, and some were wearing masks of different shapes. A new face. Is he a new member? A woman wandering around the entrance of the underground palace noticed Caesar, who had just arrived. After getting a positive answer from her guide, she smiled at him. "Welcome, welcome." Caesar noticed that she was wearing a badge on her chest. On it, he was painted very ugly. His head and forelimbs were a little deformed. It was not even as majestic and realistic as the statue in the underground palace. At the same time, he saw 2 guards carrying a wooden board out and passing by Caesar. There was a corpse lying on it. Its whole body was black, and its muscles were shriveled. Its face was frozen with a painful expression before death. The corpse had shrunk greatly. There was no blood or vitality left in its body, as if it had been sucked dry by something. The guards noticed Caesar's gaze and covered the corpse with a black cloth. "This is a lamb," the woman who spoke to him explained. "When necessary, we are all lambs. As long as we can please the Black Emperor, we will not hesitate to give up our lives." Caesar withdrew his gaze from the corpse. His expression was a little strange. "Do you really worship him that much?" "Of course." The woman had a matter-of-fact expression. "The Black Emperor is the savior, the only true god of Iradia. He will definitely lead his followers and servants to sweep across the entire continent, overturn the original decaying world, and rebuild the order." After hearing the woman's words, the believers beside her nodded. Someone added, "I'm already disappointed in the Andria kingdom. The foolish royal family and nobles are no longer able to lead the people forward. We urgently need the Blackwing Empire to save us. Before that, we have to make the temples of those fake gods disappear first," someone suggested. A cold breeze blew, and the candles in the grotto hall swayed. Everyone immediately fell silent. A masked man climbed up the altar and began to preach. He claimed that the Black Emperor was the supreme, true god who controlled life and death and the world of darkness, the reincarnation of the deceased ancient dragon god Kalankara. In his previous life, he had been nailed to death in the bottomless ocean of the underworld and had reopened his eyes thousands of years later. At the same time, the masked man also told Caesar many strange things that even he did not know. In the end, the masked man's messenger gave the believers a mission, asking them to gather 30,000 gold coins and 5 lambs for sacrifice in the next gathering. I was wondering why I suddenly have a group of fanatical believers when I didn't send any forces to infiltrate the various countries in Hudging County. Caesar lamented in his heart. "So, it's a fraud organization using my name. You damn bastards." The Black Dragon's good mood suddenly became very bad. "Enough." Just as Caesar was thinking about how to kill these people, a young man who was obviously attending the gathering for the first time jumped up. He pointed at the masked man's messenger and said loudly, "Shut up, you ignorant guy. Put away your stupid and ridiculous lies. The Black Emperor owns the entire Northern Empire. Why would he be interested in 30,000 gold coins? Bastard who doesn't dare to show his true face, you have to pay for your lies." Caesar scratched his head. It seemed that not all of the people here were liars. There were also rational and devout believers. The young man who couldn't help but speak out was obviously very angry. He thought that the masked man's messenger had insulted the noble Black Emperor. All kinds of curses flew out of his mouth, and he greeted the masked man with the most vicious curses. The crowd suddenly became turbulent. The newcomers saw this as a show, and many of them showed a look of approval. The old believers angrily walked up to the stage, wanting to punish the young man for his disrespect by nailing him on the cross and burning him to death. The masked man's messenger stopped the crowd. He didn't seem to be angry. He said calmly, "Ignorant child, do you know that I'm the descendant of the Black Emperor? What gave you the courage to question my holiness?" Under the gaze of the crowd, the young man still said confidently, "Am I wrong?" Caesar looked at the scene with great interest. The young man's words enlightened everyone present. He wanted to know how this so-called descendant of the Black Emperor was going to prove his identity. "Very well. You don't need to repent, and you don't need to beg for forgiveness," the messenger said lightly, "because I'll tell the Black Emperor that there's a lamb waiting for his arrival. I'll let you see." He looked at all the believers present. "The magnificent figure of my lord." The masked man took out a small ball from under his black robe. He carefully and devoutly placed it on the solid ground of the altar. The ball immediately began to pulse, shining with a black light, as if there was a cloud of black fog brewing and boiling inside. A cold wind swept through the underground cave, and people trembled as they knelt down. Suddenly, the small ball couldn't withstand the powerful energy inside it anymore, and it broke into pieces. A pungent black smoke drifted out of the small ball and kept rolling up. The black smoke kept surging, and finally, a figure appeared. "Who's calling my name?" Chapter 548. Was it really the Black Emperor? Everyone's eyes were filled with fear and anticipation. Even Caesar was a little surprised. It seemed that this was not just a simple scam organization. Two fierce orange-yellow eyes stared at everyone present. There seemed to be liquid flames flowing in them, shooting out rays of light that seemed to be choosing people to devour. Then, a dark upper and lower jaw appeared. It slowly opened its mouth, revealing dense, serrated fangs all over its scarlet throat. As the thick fog condensed into a solid form, people were able to see its full appearance. It was a huge dragon. Its scales were polished to a glossy shine, its wings folded behind its back, small spikes extended from its narrow front to its back, and rows of horns protruded from its back. Its whole body was compact and thin, but there was a faint sense of power. Caesar finally knew why the divine emblem worn by these believers looked so awkward. It was because it was not him at all. It was a portrait drawn according to the description and posture of the guy in front of him. "Praise the king of the black wings." The masked oracle let out a long cry and knelt down on all fours. The devout believers behind him also knelt down. Only a few newcomers were still standing there stupidly, not knowing what to do. The young man who had questioned the oracle saw the dragon reveal its true body. His previous self-confidence suddenly disappeared into the darkest corner. In front of such a magnificent dragon, words had lost their meaning. Thinking of the tragic experience that was to come, he could not help but tremble. "I smell the scent of the lamb," the dragon said. Its deep voice shook the entire underground temple. The sound waves penetrated everyone's body as if it had really come here. "Yes." The oracle pointed to the young man who was trembling in fear and said, "Your loyal servant has prepared a new sacrifice for you." "Just one?" The big orange-yellow eyes narrowed. It looked very much like Caesar's dark golden vertical pupils. "Not enough," it hissed. "One is far from enough. I need more lambs to recover the power I lost when fighting against the gods." "This is a lamb that questioned you, my master." The oracle quickly explained everything that had just happened. The dragon in the smoke listened silently. Its momentum was much more terrifying than when it had just appeared. Although the black smoke that formed its image was still rolling, its face was now very clear. Even the sound of its tail sweeping could be faintly heard. That's your problem. The dragon stared at everyone. The next time you call me, there is still only one lamb ready to be sacrificed. I will use you to fill the empty place. The oracle's face behind the mask was sweating. He humbly knelt on the ground and said, "There won't be a next time, my master. Now, please enjoy your lamb. Don't interrupt me, you lowly creature." The dragon roared angrily. "I want you to lead the people here to take action immediately and realize my mother temple. Otherwise, I will find someone to replace you, someone who will not let me down in such a major event. Blood of my blood." Caesar could not help but laugh. It seemed that the dragon had done a lot of homework in order to impersonate him. He knew that he had once called the radiation dragons the blood of my blood in the Empire. Some of the terms were used very skillfully. Coupled with the imitation of the tone and manner of speech, it was difficult for mortals who had not seen the king of the Black Wings to not be intimidated. "I understand." The oracle felt that his face was as pale as a dead man. "I will soon fulfill your request. I will not fail, my great master. I sincerely desire to serve you. When you have completed your task, you will naturally have the opportunity to join the Empire." The dragon seemed to have calmed down a little. "Now back off." The oracle and the believers left the altar one after another. The young man who had been chosen as the lamb wanted to take the opportunity to escape, but he was firmly restrained by the believers around him. Under the frightened gaze of the young man, the altar made of stone gradually shone. It was a teleportation circle. The darkness rolled, and the surrounding flames seemed to be frightened and weakened a lot. The space channel built by the teleportation circle was opened, and a terrifying head popped out. Puff! Caesar almost could not hold it in. It was not easy to recognize the projection before, but when the other party revealed its real body, he realized that the other party was not a black dragon at all. It was not even an orthodox Penishade dragon, but a shadow dragon. Playing the role of the Black Emperor with the body of Shadow Dragon, this guy was really gifted. The darkness did not stop rolling. It took a lot of concentration to realize that it was the black smoke surrounding the Shadow Dragon. It was a thick cloud that covered many parts of its body that could be used to identify its race. The Shadow Dragon stretched out its four-toed claw from the darkness and slammed it on the platform. Suddenly, a burst of wind blew toward the believers, making them even more humble. They almost did not dare to raise their heads and look at it directly. The Shadow Dragon took a deep breath and exhaled the thick black smoke that almost covered the entire underground temple. It walked in the thick smoke, wanting to enjoy its sacrifice, the young lamb. Halfway through, the Shadow Dragon's eyes suddenly moved. Only then did it realize that there was an anomaly in its temple, a mortal who had not knelt down yet. The Shadow Dragon stopped and turned around, using its orange pupils to size up Caesar. The detection spell spread out from its body. Just like the previous tavern attendant, because of the huge gap in strength, the Shadow Dragon could only obtain the information it wanted to show to the outside world from Caesar's body. However, unlike mortals, dragons had more primitive survival instincts. This instinct allowed them to collect information about potential dangers and predict threats in advance. The Shadow Dragon observed that Caesar had a calmness that was incompatible with the atmosphere of the scene. The other party's mental state was very stable, and he did not have any fear, panic, fanaticism, or other emotions that a believer should have. This made the Shadow Dragon realize that something was wrong. This guy was either scared silly by it, or he was not afraid of it. The Shadow Dragon hoped that it was the first, because the second meant trouble. At this moment, Caesar was judging the age of the Shadow Dragon by its size and characteristics. Before this, Caesar had never seen a Shadow Dragon. Like the Calamity Dragons, these Shadow Dragons did not believe in Tiamat, but followed the Night Dragon Malazar. Although he was not familiar with it, Caesar quickly judged that the Shadow Dragon opposite him had just entered its old age. Because of the disadvantage of its bloodline, it had not even stepped into the legendary realm. At this time, the Shadow Dragon walked towards Caesar. It raised its head and let the thick smoke on its chest disperse a little, deliberately revealing solid scales. "Mortal, You should kneel down and pray to your god." Caesar did not retreat in fear as the shadow dragon expected. He just stood in place, then spread out his hands. "I am a non-believer. I am your god." The shadow dragon roared. Most of the shadow dragons were more extreme. Perhaps they were more irritable than the five-colored evil dragons. "I am the only ruler of the northern world, the Dark Emperor of Iradia. Everyone should tremble under my wings." Caesar felt the shadow dragon's real anger. Is it getting into character? Chapter 549. Caesar looked at the shadow dragon calmly. In the angry roar, its body became more and more ferocious. The hard scales all over its body flowed with a metallic luster, as if they were made of bronze or even pure gold. The sharp bones protruded from the surface of its body like curved blades. As the shadow dragon moved, its strong muscles slowly undulated under the scales, and the bones all over its body made a slight cracking sound. A disdainful expression appeared on its face, as if it was really the black-winged king that people spoke of. Everyone trembled in fear and knelt down under its surging draconic might. They were at a loss, as if they were facing a landslide. Caesar was an exception. He looked at the shadow dragon in front of him with an indifferent look, as if he was examining a piece of art or a painting. Shadow dragons were quite rare in Iradia. Most of them hid in the shadow caverns that were rich in negative energy. The material plane lacked the soil for shadow dragons to grow. It could be foreseen that this guy should have the key to a half-plane, just like Ungra the Dragon of Calamity, which was born there. The shadow dragon was annoyed by this look. It understood this look because it used this look to examine its prey and believers, but it had always been the only one who did this. What right did this insignificant mortal in front of it have to look at it directly? Even a god could not look at the great king of the Black Wings with this look. The angry shadow dragon threw all its previous doubts and judgments to the back of its mind. It made up its mind to trample this ant that challenged its dignity to death. The black fog rolled over and over. The shadow dragon raised its front body slightly due to the force exerted by its hind legs. It stretched out its forefront claws and pressed down on Caesar. Most of the giant dragons in their prime could reach 15 to 20 meters in height. Killing a mortal was indeed as easy as stepping on an ant. However, the claws were thwarted in front of Caesar. An invisible barrier rose, stopping the shadow dragon's claws in midair. It opened its jaws, revealing its fangs, and suddenly increased its strength. Finally, in a strange posture, it pressed almost all the strength of its body on the barrier, but it still could not break the barrier that was casually built. In the end, it was forced to give up. It withdrew its strength and returned to its original posture. It took a few steps back and growled, "Spellcaster." Caesar nodded and did not say anything, as if he was happy to accept this new identity given by others. The shadow dragon suddenly opened its mouth, but this time it was not a roar to vent its anger, but a deafening chant in the pure dragon language. The black fog and the negative energy in the space were guided by it like tentacles and spread to Caesar's body like tentacles, climbing up the barrier in front of him. Dustless land. The characteristic of negative energy was corrosion, but it could also have an effect on some spells. Shadow Dragon used this to imitate the Blackwing King's command ability. Many years ago, the Shadow Dragon Olivier stepped into the main material world called Iradia. As an evil dragon of the Shadow Dragon family, Olivier's desire to plunder was easily stimulated by a traveling caravan. After a simple warm-up, Olivier flapped his wings and landed in front of the caravan. He thought that the caravan would resist to the death, and he even planned to hide back in the demiplane if he was wanted by the surrounding cities. However, none of this happened. The moment the caravan saw Olivier, the leader of the caravan trembled and knelt on the ground, offering his treasures and begging for mercy, shouting King of Tangerine. This was the first time Olivier heard the name Tangerine. After some investigation, he found that the King of Tangerine mentioned by the leader of the caravan was a very powerful black dragon in Iradia. At that time, Caesar had just finished his crusade against the ancient nightmare Monet and freed the cursed orcs. He was in the limelight for a while, and people called him the Black Emperor, the Dragon King. At that time, Olivian didn't have any other thoughts. If there was one, it was at most the usual jealousy and disdain of the other party's Dragon King title. But in a few subsequent events, it found that playing the role of the Black-Winged King brought far more benefits than it had imagined. Some clans that could not be intimidated by their own strength and dragons would bow their heads to the name Tangerine. Those caravans that were tightly guarded and difficult to loot would take the initiative to offer tributes to it. Even mercenaries and adventurers who were blinded by greed did not dare to take on the mission of crusading against themselves. However, the goddess of fate would never let anyone have a smooth sailing life. As Olivier's territory gradually expanded and his influence increased day by day, the Night Court of Azhara sent out investigators to investigate. Although they also respected and feared the name of Tangerine, they did not believe that the great Black Emperor would be active in this area. The Night Court's troops saw through Olivier's disguise and began to hunt him down. In the end, Olivier survived. He dragged his dying body back to the demiplane to lick his wounds. However, at this time, Olivier was no longer the original Olivier. He had enjoyed the wealth and status that came with playing the role of the Black-Winged King. The taste of power was addictive, and the desolation of the Shadow Plane could only drive him crazy. What a pitiful guy. A gentle voice sounded in the demiplane. There was a hint of femininity in the voice, but the owner of the voice was majestic and powerful. He simply sat in front of Olivier, but he was like a king sitting on a high throne. Who are you? This is my territory, the Shadow Dragon subconsciously growled. Does it matter who I am? You're the one who matters. The creature removed the shadow, revealing a humanoid body with a short horn on his head. Little guy, your poor acting skills won't fool me. Let me teach you what real acting is. Olivier later learned that the creature was a lustful demon from the Barth tribe. It conspired with the devils to change its appearance into something that did not belong to the Shadow Dragon. It was even more exaggerated and terrifying, which was more in line with people's expectations and imagination of the Black-Winged King, Tangerine. At the same time, it also learned a lot about the Black-Winged King from the lustful demon. It knew how to imitate Caesar's powerful command ability. After returning to Iradia, the Shadow Dragon became much more cautious. He left Ersala, which was under the influence of the Northern Empire, and came to the distant river valley. He established his church on the other side of the continent and played the role of the Black-Winged King again, gathering power and wealth in secret. In fact, those human sacrifices were not for Olivier to enjoy. Neither the Shadow Dragon nor the Penachet Dragon had the hobby of eating humans. Those were the currency he used to trade with the lustful demons. Lambs was originally a line used by the devils. As he continued to be modified and played the role, the Shadow Dragon obtained everything that he had dreamed of: wealth, power, status, and the power that he had obtained from making a deal with the devil. Olivier became more and more engrossed, constantly studying the life of the Black-Winged King and imitating Caesar's mannerisms, gestures, and tone. It even spent a lot of effort to capture a forest fairy and hide her in the Shadow Plane. It named her Luna. It became more and more confident, cruel, and violent. Sometimes, when it woke up from its sleep, it felt like it was in the palace of the Black-Winged Empire, standing at the center of the world, the ruler of everything. In a daze, it seemed like it had really replaced that creature and become the true, insufferably arrogant Dark Emperor. Royal power, Emperor, destructive breath. The Shadow Dragon wantonly unleashed its power and roared the name of the skill in the dragon language. Caesar was stunned and embarrassed. However, Caesar only strengthened his spiritual power slightly, and the attack of negative energy was nullified. What a pitiful guy. Caesar did not know that he had said the same thing as the lustful demons. He sighed softly. Should I wake you up from your dream? The Shadow Dragon lowered its head in confusion. It only saw a pair of dark golden eyes with spiderweb-like patterns in the pupils. Order, royal power. Chapter 550. Only those with Caesar's permission were allowed to stand in the domain. The shadow dragon's four knees couldn't withstand the unstoppable pressure, and the enormous creature instantly knelt before Caesar. Fortunately, Caesar ignored the other mortals in the underground temple. Otherwise, even if he intentionally restrained his spiritual energy, these mortals would have been instantly crushed into a pile of flesh and blood. The shadow dragon's breathing became heavy and short. Under the terrifying pressure of the king's domain, its entire body was compressed, and its face shrank as if it had aged hundreds of years in an instant. The first thing that Olivier thought of was to stand up again. As a true dragon, its pride and dignity didn't allow it to kneel before a mortal. However, no matter how hard it tried, it couldn't do it. Excessive resistance caused more damage to its body, such as broken ribs, shattered knees, and bleeding eyeballs. Only now did the shadow dragon, who had calmed down, begin to think about its current predicament and problem. The first thing it thought of was that it almost couldn't breathe. It trembled under the gaze of the mortal in front of it, and great fear rose from the depths of its heart. This domain, this mortal, he just said, King's domain. Olivier had researched the Blackwing King for many years, working day and night to gather information regarding him. Naturally, he knew what this name signified. Countless times, in his dreams, Olivier had fantasized that he would one day possess that sort of power. But now, the person who wielded royal authority had truly appeared before him. The legendary Blackwing King. No, no, no. The shadow dragon stared at the mortal and let out a shrill scream. Although it already knew the answer, it still asked hysterically, "Who are you?" I have to say that your imitation is perfect in certain aspects. It seems that you've done a lot of research and collected a lot of information. So, you should know very well who I am. That's impossible. In order to disguise yourself as me, you seem to have modified yourself. These cuticles and protruding thorns on the surface of your body aren't a disguise. But as far as I know, shadow dragons don't have such a body structure. Caesar frowned as if he were still admiring a painting and examining his fake. Under the gaze of his dark golden eyes, the black mist surrounding the shadow dragon all dispersed. I don't regret making a deal with the devil. After confirming Caesar's identity, the shadow dragon surprisingly calmed down. Its previous madness and brutality were gone, and its voice was exceptionally clear. I chose it myself. Even if I have to change myself beyond recognition, even if I have to pay more lives, I am still willing to do it. As soon as Olivier finished his words, the shadow dragon suddenly went berserk. This young dragon that had yet to enter the legendary realm actually managed to break free from the suppression of royal authority for a short period of time. It raised its four deformed claws and clawed at Caesar's head. Its intention was obviously to crush Caesar's entire head. Even though it was facing the real king of the Blackwing, Olivier still launched an attack without hesitation. Like a moth flying into a brazier or an egg crashing into a sturdy wall, Olivier's attack was as laughable as an ant gnawing on a titan. Even if Caesar burned his life force, it was useless. The shadow dragon crashed into the defensive barrier that had never been broken. After that, it could not advance any further, lying on the barrier in a comical posture. "Give up on attacking me. You won't have a chance," Caesar said. He didn't plan to kill the dragon for the time being. "I must be very laughable in your eyes, right? Just like a clown in a circus." The shadow dragon's voice was hoarse and obscure. It looked very disappointed, but it still did not give up attacking. "What's the point of doing this?" Caesar said. "A disguise is just a disguise. No matter how good your acting is, you can't become another dragon." "How do you understand?" The shadow dragon Olivier bellowed. "You are all extraordinarily talented Penachade dragons. How can you possibly empathize with us moths who live in the shadows? The dragon god has cruelly abandoned us. If our roles were reversed, how many days would you be able to endure in the sunless shadow plane?" It raised its body, and its giant claws carried the cold wind of death. This was the fight of a trapped beast. Dragon blood spurted out of Olivier's body, but it forgot everything. It only wanted to attack Caesar. As long as I kill you, I will become the king of the Blackwing. No, I am the real king of the Blackwing. The shadow dragon's eyes widened, and it made a ho-ho sound from its throat. Die, shameful fake. Breath of destruction. The black fog spun like a vortex, and negative energy particles condensed in its mouth. Olivier's vigorous and boiling life force gathered together. The power comparable to a legend exploded, forming a twisted, dark pillar of light in its mouth. On the shadow dragon's back, which was bleeding, the huge membrane wings were fully opened, flapping and raising a fierce wind. It spat, venting all its energy and life force on Caesar's shield. After the terrifying black light exploded, the shadow dragon fell to the ground softly. Blood slowly oozed out of its body, forming a dark red puddle under its body. It was dead. It died in the violent resistance against the king's domain and the crazy attack that burned its life force. Unfortunately, even in death, it did not tear apart Caesar's shield. It was like an abyss that was difficult to cross, crossing between the real and the fake king of the Blackwing. The dead Olivier's eyes were still open. His orange pupils had not been extinguished, and he was exuding the majesty of a king. Caesar looked at him and did not understand why the shadow dragon would launch such a crazy attack. Apart from pretending to be him and deceiving others, there was no irreconcilable conflict between them. However, when the shadow dragon saw him, it was as if it had seen an irreconcilable enemy. Only one of them would live under the same sky. Caesar sighed and took a scale from the shadow dragon's body. It was the crystallization of Olivier's magic power. Now, it was slowly fading from the steel-black color to the shadow dragon's original charcoal gray color. There was a small magic space in it. A large number of gold coins and silver accessories, more than 10 enchanted weapons, 3 magic books, a collection of stories, and several epic poems about the king of the Blackwing, Caesar. Olivier did not have the habit of keeping a diary, but in the corner of the magic space, Caesar still found the location and related information of the shadow plane where the shadow dragon hid when it was alive. The place was located in the forest of the Forsaken in the swamp, where the dwarves used to live in the alliance of the 3 castles. Go take a look? Caesar had an idea in his mind. Although Olivier was dead, there were still many unsolved mysteries about it, such as the unusual transformation of the body, the spell that burned life, and so on. Moreover, the shadow dragon seemed to have mentioned the devil before. Your Excellency. At this time, a bold believer walked over, trembling. The development of the situation was completely beyond their imagination. With their brain capacity, it would take them a few days or even a few weeks to figure out what had just happened. However, there was no doubt about one thing. The thing they had been praying to was not the legendary king of the Blackwing, because it was killed, and the real king of the Blackwing was unkillable. Caesar came back to his senses and glanced at the believers who were still in shock. After thinking for a while, he reached out and pointed at the young man who had questioned the oracle. You come here. Everyone's eyes gathered, and the believers who were holding the young man let go of him. He looked left and right, and carefully took 2 steps forward. Then he stepped in front of Caesar. Sir, my name is... I don't need to know your name. Caesar shook his head. From today onwards, you are the person in charge here. You are in charge of the development of the church and all other matters. The young man answered instinctively. He did not even think about why Caesar would say such words. But I'm just an ordinary person. I'm afraid I don't have the ability. You will soon have it. Chapter 551. After leaving the underground temple of Corinthia, Caesar, who was not used to his human body, immediately returned to his original form. He flapped his wings and flew across the river, over the empty yellowish plains, over the decaying forest and the winter wasteland, all the way to the territory of the dwarves. After landing, he passed by a scarred valley. Lava gushed out from the wounds in the earth, emitting a high temperature that only the red dragon could endure. The soil within miles was gray. This was the scar of war. The war between the dwarves and the three castles had almost completely destroyed this place. The devastated land would take hundreds or thousands of years to heal. Countless skeletons of griffins and other animals were strewn across the ground. They had turned pale due to the corrosion of time. They were scattered across the wasteland, just like the withered forests in other places. The swamp had been completely reduced to a place of death, where the spirits and ghosts roamed. No wonder it borders the shadow plane. Caesar murmured as he looked around. The soft, dusty ground sank under his feet. A series of huge footprints appeared behind him. In addition to the undead, there were also some small animals that fed on rotten meat, such as giant ghouls, fierce vultures, and bloody hyenas. Before the black dragon could get close, these little creatures had already disappeared into the ground. According to the location marked by the shadow dragon, Caesar climbed up a towering mountain and looked down at the dead desert. Shadows stretched across the land at dusk. Light and darkness crisscrossed. In a very hidden and unidentifiable place of light and darkness, the black dragon found the spatial node to the shadow plane. He swooped down, approached it, and triggered it. The road was clear, the sky was dark, and the sunlight did not belong to this plane. Ashes and poisonous clouds, stirred up by negative energy, shrouded the sky. At the end of the horizon, volcanoes erupted one after another, as if it was the end of the world. However, what was spewing out was not magma, but dark blood. It looked terrible, but in fact, it was just an illusion built by negative energy. The shadow plane was full of illusions. If one followed the reference point here, they would definitely die miserably. But the thing in front of them was more puzzling. Caesar was flying around a huge sorcerer's stone in the shadow plane. The sorcerer's stone was shaped like a reef pulled up from the sea. It was full of various patterns painted with bright red paint. Crack! Caesar had been ambushed. His tough scales knocked the attacker aside. This was a shadow dragon that was slightly smaller than Olivier. Its two hind legs were slender and vicious, and its charcoal gray scales were dotted with white spots. Its belly was brown, and the horns on its head were small and short. There's another one. Caesar was a little surprised. The shadow dragon's eyes were filled with crazy hostility. It arched its back, and the muscles on its four limbs bulged as it charged forward with a bang. Just as they were about to make contact, a tail that was thicker than the shadow dragon's waist swung over. It struck the upper half of the shadow dragon's body and smashed it to the ground. Its bones were broken and its organs were crushed. The dying shadow dragon howled in pain, but it still stared at Caesar with a fierce look, opened its big mouth, and clumsily repeated two words in the dragon language: invade, kill. Invade, kill. Only now did Caesar realize that this was not a true dragon, but a draconic beast that had failed in its inheritance. It was about the same age as Olivier and should be of the same race. It had been raised by Olivier in the shadow plane. Shadow dragons were not dragons of calamity and did not have the tradition of killing their own siblings. After accidentally killing the shadow dragon, Caesar did not have any thoughts of turning them into skeletal dragons. Instead, he stared at its corpse in a daze. After a long time, he sighed. Two pitiful fellows. After a pause, Caesar, who had calmed himself down, returned his attention to the blood sorcerer's stone that was covered in runes. This scene was familiar. Back when he was investigating the dark zone where the flamed demon sovereign Asliers had landed, he had smelled a similar aura, rich and pure negative energy. It seemed that the demons were not the ravings of Olivier, but real. After so many years, these fellows that lived in the hell of Bador had once again appeared in Iradia. Do you need me to drag you out? Caesar stared ahead, his gaze seemingly piercing through the blood sorcerer's stone. His tone was harsh. Although a draconic beast that has lost its inheritance has low intelligence, it still knows how to rely on its instincts to judge threats. No matter how violent and vicious it is, it will not attack me unless it is controlled by some force. I just want to confirm your identity and admire the power of the Black Sovereign Iradia. A charming female voice echoed in the shadow plane. What's wrong? You can't hold it in anymore. Is this how the demons treat their guests? Caesar said to the front. Killing 2 of my kind in a row makes me very unhappy. Don't test my patience. Otherwise, I don't know what this blood sorcerer's stone will turn into in the next second. The blood sorcerer's stone responded with a rumbling sound, and the shadow plane began to shake. The rumbling sound seemed to come from a different dimension far away. The huge sound waves almost made Caesar want to seal off his hearing. The cross-plane magic circle was formed, and a huge shadow door was opened. The culprit gradually revealed herself. She had the body of a female human. Her body was slender, and her skin was white. Her long and narrow eyebrows were like beautiful arcs, and her emerald eyes were flowing with a gentle luster. The black pearl on her neck accentuated her collarbone. The hot wind blew her wine-red hair up, swaying between her temples. Her skin was as delicate as a baby's, and her skin seemed to be flowing with radiance. The wild wind had exposed a large part of her skin. Every curve was almost perfect, as if she was a sculpture carved by the hands of a god. Although she was a lustful demon, the feeling she gave off was unexpectedly clean, and there were no evil thoughts. If not for the fact that they knew her identity in advance, perhaps no one would associate this creature with the evil demons of hell. This is the first time we've met. Please allow me to briefly introduce myself. She smiled at Caesar, and her beautiful voice was like a gentle bell in the middle of the day, moving one's heart. As you can see, I am a lustful demon from the Barth tribe. My name is Glagia. If you like, you can just call me Glagia. Black Dragon's vertical pupils twitched. She was Glagia? She was the daughter of Asmodeus, the ruler of Bator, the ruler of the 6 hells, the lustful demon, Queen Glagia. How can a great demon of Bator appear in a material plane? This was Caesar's first question. Have you forgotten about your worshipper? Glagia smiled. In order to become the Black King, he did everything he could to trade with us. He offered us countless delicious lambs, and even his own life force. The blood magic stone in front of you is the masterpiece of our friend, Shadow Dragon Olivier. He gave so much in exchange for a change in appearance. Caesar grinned, revealing his thick and sharp fangs. As expected of a demon, he did it willingly. No one forced him, Glagia said softly. I know what you're thinking, but it's too late. The realm gate has already been constructed. Destroying this magic stone won't help. Besides, we can't be considered enemies. Chapter 552. Please follow me. Glagia turned around, showing her back to Caesar. She didn't seem to care about the black dragon's attack at all. Her bare feet floated in the air as she led the black dragon into the depths of the shadow plane. The path slowly turned from horizontal to vertical. With the help of the shadow or his light, one could see that the walls of the tunnel were smooth and complete. It was as though thousands of small knives had been carved out. Under the guidance of the Eros Queen, Caesar found Olivier's lair. Rather than calling it a cave, it would be better to call it a vast underground world. An underground river ran from one end to the other, and the cave was so high that one couldn't see the ceiling. More than a dozen tunnels lined the walls. This wasn't the work of a shadow dragon that had yet to reach the legendary realm. Caesar had reason to believe that the devils had taken over this place without the deceased Olivier noticing. Countless corpses filled up half of the space. Under the influence of negative energy, some of the incomplete corpses swayed back and forth, cold flames burning in their eye sockets. Translucent, vengeful spirits roamed the space, opening their mouths wide to the point of tearing, but not making the slightest sound. These low-ranked undead wandered aimlessly, looking for their own corpses or any other living creatures. The underground space wasn't deathly still. A type of cave dweller, known as the Dementors, were here to collect corpses or hunt ghosts. They didn't have eyes. In such a dark cave, if one didn't have night vision, there was no need for them to exist. The Dementors had tentacles longer than their bodies, and their claws were covered in cilia. Through their sensitive sense of smell and touch, they could sense the changes in their environment. When Caesar walked through the tunnel, All the Dementors stood in a daze, not knowing what was going on. There were other creatures as well. Caesar saw a large undead flashing by. An ecosystem of undead creatures had already formed in this underground world. They relied on negative energy to provide nutrients and flourished in the demiplane. The black dragon observed these ignorant undead creatures until the scenery in front of him changed into a tall and majestic palace. This wasn't a temporary residence. The spacious hall was filled with magnificent candles. On the cold rocks, soaked in blood, there were many treasures that the devils loved. These were the souls that had been sold. The greater devils would constantly squeeze the value out of these souls to maintain their eternal lives. In Bator, these souls were the foundation of the economy. They were also known as lambs or coins. There was a dense barrier of light, a magic barrier, and a negative energy field. Are you interested? Gracia sat down on the throne of blood and noticed that Caesar was looking around. She rested her chin on her hand and said to him calmly, "If you have time, you are welcome to travel to hell at any time. I can volunteer to be your guide. If I rashly go to Bator, I might be eaten by you greater devils." Caesar sneered. No. I'm afraid you have misunderstood the hell of Bator. Hell is a place of absolute order. We abide by laws and rules and follow every written contract. If you accept my invitation to tour hell, I promise that even my father, the master of 9 hells, will not do anything illegal to you, as long as you don't violate any rules. Gracia's expression was solemn as she explained, "Please don't lump us together with filthy demons. These two races really like to slander each other." Caesar chuckled inwardly. He remembered that the Flame Devil King had once cursed the devils in front of him. He didn't want to discuss this matter and changed the subject. "You said that we aren't enemies." "Of course." Gracia pointed at the soft couch beside her, and the 3 little devils immediately ran over. They grabbed the sides of the couch and stretched it so that the black dragon could lie down on his side. "The enemy of my enemy is my friend." When the worm-eroded tunnel reaches the material plane, the number of demons arriving in Iradia will surge. According to our investigation, you don't seem to be willing to give up this world to the demons. Neither do we. Iradia is my home. Caesar frowned. And to you, it's just a pasture for lambs. The so-called gods are jackals of the same tribe. One of you thirsts for souls, while the other thirsts for faith. I hate demons, but that doesn't mean I'll accept you. The problem is that we're on the same side. Gracia looked at Caesar. Trust me, the blood war has been going on for 100,000 years. No one understands how strong the demons are better than us. The 3 pillar gods are great existences on par with my father, and there are hundreds of other lords and monarchs. With such strength, it's hard for me to imagine anyone being able to defeat an army of demons alone. Without our help, Iradia will definitely fall into the demons' hands. Don't try to scare me. Caesar waved his claws. When it comes to material planes, demons only carry out meaningless conquest and destruction. The blood war is the main battlefield that they truly value. Not to mention the 3 pillar gods. Even the lords of the abyss might not come. You're right, Gracia admitted. Glagia admitted, but demons are chaotic and have low intelligence. If they suffer a setback, they'll continue to pour in their forces until the world is destroyed. Just tell me your plans. Caesar didn't like this kind of dialogue. In the future, this place will become a stronghold for the devils. The troops of Bator will disembark here and resist the demons' invasion together with the creatures of the material planes, the allied gods, and the celestials. If we win, we hope to borrow Iradia's worm-eaten passage to attack the abyss, said Gracia. Logically speaking, Caesar should not have any reason to reject the demon's offer of help. However, from the words of this great demon, the black dragon smelled the scent of a conspiracy. If they wanted to counterattack the bottomless abyss through the worm-eaten tunnel, they would have to gather their forces in Eladia. With such a huge military force, the devils were fully capable of conquering Eladia before they invaded the abyss, merging this world into a part of the Hell of Bator. To them, This was the best of both worlds. Not only could they harvest countless souls, but they could also stabilize their rear base. Even if they signed a contract, the Lord of the Nine Hells would have his ways to bypass them. After all, the devils were experts in this field. None of them are trustworthy, Caesar concluded. However, he didn't intend to take any measures against the devils. After all, the demons of the abyss were the greatest threat to Iradia. The devils and the gods were a matter for the future. After thinking it over, the black dragon nodded. All right, he then asked an unrelated question. How do you devils bewitch other creatures in assigning contracts? Not bewitchment, but digging. Gracia smiled as she explained, as devils, our most basic innate ability is to listen. We can sense the calls of other creatures, and when we discover that they intend to sell their souls, we'll appear before them and dig into their deepest desires to make a deal. That's why there's a saying in the material planes that devils are born from the human heart. This reasoning is foolish and laughable, but it seems to have some basis in the material planes. You said appear before them. Caesar ignored the Irene's joke and asked, are there any other methods? For example, whispering in one's ear or appearing repeatedly in one's dreams. Also, does this bewitchment have any side effects? For example, losing one's mind, deforming the body, or going completely insane. You've encountered this type of bewitchment before? The Irene's voice suddenly turned serious, revealing an expression that Caesar had never seen before. The black dragon noticed that she had unsheathed the whip of sin and was in a battle-ready state. That's right, the black dragon nodded. I once came into contact with a human who was able to use some kind of incomprehensible power. Even now, I still find it very strange that I haven't been able to find the source of that power. Caesar had never forgotten about Roy, not only because he was his first enemy after stepping into this world, but also because of the mysterious power of the Brindle family. After killing Roy and destroying the Brindle family, that strange and crazy thing had sought out Caesar more than once. But he was too weak at that time and had always kept a respectful distance from such things. But now was different. He's terrible at cards and likes to cheat, but he's still one of my few friends. You want me to kill him? You think too much. That you're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.